Hello everyone. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from? And what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. My name's Mike and I go to school in a town called Riverdale. It's a small, out-of-the-way place, one of those quiet college towns where nothing big ever seems to happen. At least that's what I thought before last semester. I shared my dorm room with this guy named Chris. We weren't close, but we got along well enough. He was a pretty chill guy, into his books, and we'd sometimes go for a beer or grab food after a long day. Nothing out of the ordinary. But then things started to get strange. Chris started to get strange. It happened gradually, which is probably why I didn't notice it at first. He'd started keeping to himself more, shutting himself up in his room for hours. It wasn't that weird. Finals were coming up and we were all pretty stressed out. But Chris, he went from being the laid-back guy I'd known to a complete recluse. He didn't talk much anymore, hardly even left the room. I didn't think too much of it, but I'd occasionally try to knock on his door, see if he wanted to grab food or something. Each time there was no answer. I thought he was just busy. Then, after a couple of days of silence, I started to worry. His side of the room was a mess, clothes everywhere, books and papers scattered on the floor. It was strange, especially for Chris, who usually kept his stuff pretty organized. I started wondering if something was wrong. Then one night, something happened that I can't explain. It was late, probably close to midnight. I was lying in bed trying to get some sleep, but I kept hearing these strange noises coming from Chris's room. It sounded like shuffling, like he was dragging something heavy across the floor. I figured maybe he was moving stuff around, organizing, whatever. But then the noises got louder. At first I tried to ignore it, but it was impossible to sleep with all the noise. I got up, walked over to his door and knocked. "Chris," I called, waiting for an answer. Nothing. I knocked again, harder this time. "Hey man, you okay?" Still nothing. I pressed my ear against the door, trying to listen. That's when I heard it. A voice, but not Chris's. It was deep, gruff, like a man's voice, and I could hear him whispering. My heart started to race. Chris never had anyone over, not that I'd seen, and we both had our own rooms. No one should have been in there with him. I backed away, trying to make sense of it. Should I call out again? Should I go get someone? My hands were shaking and I didn't know what to do. I took a deep breath, tried to steady myself. I went back to bed, but there was no way I could sleep. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening. The shuffling continued, along with that voice. My mind was racing. Who the hell was in there? And why hadn't Chris said anything? Eventually, the sounds stopped. The silence was even worse. I lay there, wide awake, too scared to move. My pulse was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I must have fallen asleep at some point, because the next thing I knew, it was morning. I opened my eyes, sat up, and immediately looked at Chris's door. It was open. I hesitated, but curiosity got the best of me. I stood up, walked over to his door, and looked inside. The room was empty. Completely empty. The bed was made, his clothes were gone, his books too. It was like he'd never even lived there. I backed up, confused, and more than a little freaked out. It didn't make any sense. His room had been a mess the night before. I'd heard him, or someone, in there. Now everything was spotless and Chris was gone. I went straight to the RA's office, told her everything. She looked at me like I was crazy, but said she'd check with the housing office, see if Chris had moved out or something. Later that day, the RA found me. "Chris moved out this morning," she said, looking concerned. "Everything's fine." I didn't understand. I was there all night. How could he have moved out without me knowing? I asked if anyone had seen him, if they'd noticed anything strange, but she just shrugged. As far as she knew, he'd left on his own. But I knew what I'd heard. The days passed, and I tried to forget about it, to brush it off. I told myself that maybe I'd imagined it, that I'd been half asleep or something, but I couldn't shake the feeling. Chris's room stayed empty, and every time I passed it, I felt this unease, like I was being watched. Then, about a week later, it happened again. It was late at night and I was getting ready to crash when I heard it. The shuffling, the whispering. Only this time it wasn't coming from Chris's old room. It was coming from the room next to mine. I froze, listening. It was the same sounds, that same voice. My skin prickled and my heart was pounding. I stepped into the hallway looking around, trying to figure out what was happening. The room next to mine belonged to a freshman named Nate. He was a quiet kid, kept to himself mostly, but I'd seen him around. I knocked on his door, calling his name. "Nate," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You okay in there?" No response. I tried the doorknob, but it was locked. I pressed my ear to the door, listening. I could hear that voice, that deep whispering voice, like someone was speaking to him right there in his room. My stomach twisted and I backed away. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to get help, but who would believe me? I'd tried going to the RA before and she'd brushed me off, but this wasn't my imagination. I'd heard it plain as day. Something was going on in that building, something I couldn't explain. The next morning I went to the RA again, told her what I'd heard. She looked at me annoyed and said that Nate was fine, that I was probably overreacting. But I knew I wasn't. Another night passed, and I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear it again, the shuffling, the voice. And then, just like with Chris, Nate disappeared. One day, his room was empty, just like Chris's had been. His things were gone, the bed was made, like he'd never been there. And the RA just shrugged it off like it was no big deal. But it was a big deal. Two guys, both acting strange, both disappearing overnight without a trace. And that voice, that deep, whispering voice. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was next. I started to hear things at night even when I was alone. Footsteps in the hallway, shadows moving outside my door. I kept the lights on, kept my door locked, but it didn't help. I felt like I was being watched, like something was waiting for me. Then, one night, I woke up to the sound of my door creaking open. My heart was pounding, and I reached for my phone, my hands shaking. I looked toward the door, but there was no one there. Just darkness, a shadowy outline. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I lay there, clutching my phone, staring at the open door. And then I heard it. A voice, low and deep, whispering my name. I didn't wait. I grabbed my things, threw on my shoes, and bolted. I didn't care where I went, didn't look back. I just ran down the stairs out of the building into the night. I don't know what happened to Chris or Nate or who or what was in that room with them. All I know is that I couldn't stay in that dorm. I left Riverdale after that semester, transferred to another school. I haven't looked back since. But every now and then, late at night, I hear it. That same whispering voice calling my name, and I wonder if it's still out there waiting for me. I'd been under a lot of stress lately. Work was relentless, my phone didn't stop buzzing, and I felt like I couldn't catch a break. So I decided to rent a beach house for the weekend. Just a quiet little place on the coast, a couple of hours from home in a town called Blue Harbor. Small, peaceful, the kind of place you'd imagine spending a weekend with nothing but the sound of waves to keep you company. When I pulled up to the house, everything looked exactly like the photos. Small, cozy, right on the edge of the beach with a deck overlooking the water. It was perfect. The rental company left the keys in a lockbox by the door, just as they'd promised. I got in, dropped my bags, and let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. This was going to be a good weekend. The first day went by smoothly. I took a long walk on the beach, read a book on the deck, and made a quick dinner in the small kitchen. There was something about the quiet that made me feel like I was finally relaxing, finally letting go of the stress. I went to bed early, looking forward to another day of peace. But on the second day, things started to feel off. I woke up that morning to the sound of the waves. I made some coffee, sat out on the deck for a bit, and then decided to take another walk down the beach. When I came back, though, I noticed something strange. The front door was unlocked. I was pretty sure I'd locked it when I left. I'm the type of guy who double-checks that kind of thing. But I shrugged it off, figuring maybe I'd just forgotten. That night, after dinner, I settled in on the couch to watch a movie. It was quiet in the house, almost too quiet. Every little creak sounded louder, and I kept feeling like something was out of place, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I told myself I was being paranoid. I went to bed, hoping for a good night's sleep. When I got to the bedroom, though, I noticed something that stopped me cold. The blanket on the bed was folded differently. I always left it crumpled up at the end of the bed. It wasn't a big change, just a small, neat fold at the foot of the bed, but it was enough to make me pause. I stood there staring at it, trying to convince myself I'd done it without thinking. But I knew that wasn't true. A knot started forming in my stomach, but I didn't want to overreact. I told myself that maybe someone from the cleaning crew had come by, even though the rental description didn't mention any daily housekeeping. It was the only thing that made sense. The next day, things got weirder. I went out again in the morning, just for a quick walk. When I came back, the kitchen felt different. I'd left a dish drying by the sink, but now it was in a different spot. And my coffee mug, which I'd left on the counter, had been moved. I was sure I hadn't touched them. I felt my heart start to pound. I went around the house, checking every window, every door. They were all locked. There was no sign that anyone had broken in, nothing missing, nothing else out of place. But I could feel it. Someone had been in there. I could feel it in my bones. Later that afternoon, I called the rental agency. I kept my voice steady, told them I thought maybe someone had come in without my knowledge. They assured me that no one else had access to the house. No cleaning service, no maintenance scheduled. They told me I was the only person with a key. When I hung up, my unease turned into full-blown dread. That night, I locked every window, every door, double-checking each one. I tried to distract myself with another movie, but I couldn't focus. Every little sound made me jump. The creak of the floorboards, the hum of the fridge. I felt like the walls were closing in on me. I went to bed early, but sleep didn't come. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, straining to hear any sound that didn't belong. My heart was pounding, and I felt like I was being watched. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I drifted off. Sometime in the night, I woke up. It was still dark, and the room was silent. I glanced at the clock. It was just after 3 a.m. That's when I saw it. On the bedside table, there was a small piece of paper that hadn't been there before. My heart started racing as I reached for it, my hands trembling. The handwriting was neat, almost too neat. The message was simple: I'm watching. I felt the blood drain from my face. I sat up, scanning the room, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I grabbed my phone, my fingers shaking so badly I could barely unlock it. I dialed 911, but before I could hit call, I heard a noise outside the bedroom door. A soft creak like someone shifting their weight. I froze, clutching the phone. My mind was racing, my body locked in place. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I listened, straining to hear any other sound. The silence was so thick it felt like it was pressing down on me. I waited, minutes passing like hours, but I heard nothing else. Eventually, I mustered the courage to get up. I crept out of bed, moving as quietly as I could. I pressed my ear to the door, listening. Nothing. Slowly, I cracked the door open, peeking out into the hallway. It was empty, just shadows and silence. I moved through the house, checking every room, turning on every light as I went. But there was no one there. The front door was locked just as I'd left it. I couldn't find any sign that someone else had been inside. But that note, it was real. I still had it, clenched in my fist. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat on the couch, every light on, my eyes darting around the room. I felt like I was going crazy. The next morning, I packed my things. I didn't care that I'd paid for the whole weekend. I wasn't staying another night. I loaded my bags into the car, locked the house, and drove away without looking back. But even as I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching me. Every car that passed, every shadow on the road, felt like it was following me. By the time I got back home, I was exhausted, barely holding it together. That night back in my apartment, I thought I'd feel safe. But as I lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing sounds, the creak of the floor, the hum of the fridge. Every little noise made my heart race. Then I heard it. A soft shuffle outside my bedroom door, just like at the beach house. I sat up, heart pounding, straining to hear. There was nothing else, just silence. But I knew I wasn't alone. I'm not usually one to get spooked. I live alone, I've always liked the quiet, and I don't mind doing my own thing. I have a routine, a simple one. Most evenings after work, I like to go jogging. Nothing crazy, just a few laps around the park near my apartment here in Madisonville. It's close by, familiar, and I've always felt safe there. But a few weeks ago, something changed. It was one of those calm, cool nights. The sun was low, casting long shadows, and the air was just right. Not too hot, not too cold. Perfect jogging weather. I started my usual route, going in through the main entrance, crossing the small bridge over the creek, looping around the lake, and then back. The park was mostly empty, which I liked. Just a few other joggers and some people walking their dogs. It was peaceful, like always. I was a few minutes into my jog when I first noticed him. Just a man, walking along the path in the opposite direction. He didn't look like anyone I'd seen around before, which was odd because I'd been running this same route for months. He wore a hoodie with the hood up, even though it wasn't that cold, and dark jeans. Not exactly the kind of clothes you'd wear for a walk in the park. I remember thinking it was weird, but I brushed it off and kept jogging. I passed him, and as I did, I felt his eyes on me. You know that feeling when someone's watching you? That's what it felt like. I glanced over, just a quick look, but he didn't turn away. His face was hidden under the hood, but his head was definitely turned in my direction. It was unsettling, but I kept moving, figuring he'd just go on his way. But when I looped back around, there he was again, standing near the entrance where I'd started. It didn't make sense. I'd only been running for a few minutes. He shouldn't have had time to get there unless he'd gone back on the path behind me. I told myself he was just taking a walk like everyone else, but something about it didn't sit right. The way he just stood there, watching, like he was waiting for something. I pushed it out of my mind, finished my run, and went home. I told myself it was nothing, that I was being paranoid. But the next time I went to the park, he was there again. It was almost dusk, the park even emptier than usual. As I started my run, I spotted him near the entrance, just standing there. This time, he wasn't walking or even looking around. He was just still, watching. My heart started to pound, but I tried to ignore it. I focused on my pace, kept my head down, and ran past him without looking. As I rounded the lake, I glanced back, and he was gone. Relief washed over me, and I tried to shake it off. But as I got near the entrance, I saw him again, just off to the side of the path. He didn't move as I approached, didn't say anything, but I felt his eyes on me. I sped up, trying to act like I didn't notice him, but I could feel his gaze following me. When I got back to my apartment, I was still rattled. I couldn't shake the image of him standing there. That hood covering his face, those eyes locked on me. I tried to laugh it off, told myself I was overreacting. It was just some guy after all. People are allowed to walk in the park. But something about it felt wrong. Over the next week, I tried to avoid him. I went at different times, hoping he wouldn't be there. But every time, without fail, he showed up. Always near the entrance, always watching. Sometimes he'd be standing off to the side. Sometimes he'd be walking in the opposite direction. But he was always there, like he knew exactly when I'd show up. One evening, I decided to change my route completely. I went earlier than usual, around late afternoon, and started on the opposite side of the park near the lake. I was hoping that if I went a different way, he wouldn't be able to find me. For the first half of my run, I didn't see him, and I started to relax. Maybe I'd just been imagining things. But as I neared the end of my loop, I saw him again. This time he was further down the path, walking in the same direction as me. I slowed down, not wanting to pass him, but as soon as I did, he stopped walking and stepped off to the side, just like before. Watching. My stomach dropped. I didn't know if he was following me or if he just had some weird pattern, but it didn't feel right. I decided then and there that I wasn't going to jog in the evenings anymore. It wasn't worth it, that uneasy feeling. I told myself I'd start running in the mornings instead. But a few days later, I found myself back in the park in the evening. I don't know why I went back. Maybe I was just being stubborn, telling myself I was being ridiculous. I decided to stick to a well-lit path and not go too far from the entrance, just to play it safe. For the first part of my run, I didn't see him. I started to think maybe he wasn't there after all, that I'd just worked myself up over nothing. But halfway through my loop, I saw him again. He was ahead of me, standing on a small trail that branched off into a more secluded area of the park. He was just off the main path, his body half hidden by the trees. I slowed down, my heart pounding. I didn't want to look at him, didn't want to give him the satisfaction of knowing I was scared. But I knew he was waiting for me. I kept my pace steady, pretending like I hadn't noticed him, and kept moving forward. Just as I was about to pass him, he stepped onto the main path and started walking towards me. My chest tightened. I thought about turning back, but that felt too obvious, too much like running away. I kept going, trying to stay calm, but I could feel his eyes on me as he came closer. As we passed each other, he cut across the path, moving towards me in a way that wasn't casual. It was deliberate. He was trying to intercept me. I stopped, my mind racing. I could turn around and run, but I wasn't sure if I could outrun him. He was closer to the exit than I was, and he seemed to know the park better than I did. I started walking again, faster this time, but he matched my pace, staying just close enough that I could feel his presence behind me. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him, his face still hidden under that hood, his steps quiet and steady. I didn't know what to do. My heart was pounding, my mind racing. There was a small clearing off the path that led to another trail, one that looped around towards the road. I didn't know it well, but it was my best shot. I veered off the path, heading towards it, hoping he wouldn't follow. But as soon as I did, I heard his footsteps behind me, faster now, closing in. He was following me. There was no doubt in my mind. I broke into a sprint, my legs burning, my breath coming in sharp gasps, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I could hear his footsteps behind me, heavy and fast, gaining on me with every step. The trail twisted through the trees, the branches scraping my arms as I pushed through, my mind racing with panic. Just when I thought I couldn't run any farther, I saw the road up ahead, the faint glow of the streetlights, the distant sound of cars. I was so close. I pushed myself harder, my legs shaking, my lungs burning. I could feel him behind me, could feel his presence closing in. But as I reached the edge of the trail, his footsteps suddenly stopped. I didn't slow down. I kept running until I burst through the trees and onto the side of the road. A car drove by and I waved my arms, desperate to get their attention, but they didn't stop. I turned around, expecting to see him there, but the trail was empty. He was gone. I stood there, gasping for breath, my heart pounding in my ears. I waited, watching the trail, half expecting him to come out of the trees any second. But he didn't. The park was silent, the shadows deep, and I was alone. Eventually, I made my way home. I didn't go back to the park after that. I couldn't. Every time I thought about it, I felt that same dread, that same cold fear. I don't know who he was or what he wanted, but I know he was following me. And I know that if I hadn't run when I did, I might not have made it out of there. Now every time I think about jogging, I feel that same knot in my stomach. I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there, waiting, watching, ready to finish what he started. And I'll never set foot in that park again. It was a Thursday evening, right after I got home from work. I live alone in a small house just outside of a town called Greenville, North Carolina. The place is isolated, surrounded by thick woods, which I actually like. I can go weeks without seeing another soul unless I decide to drive into town. It's quiet, and that's what I wanted when I bought the place. But that quiet came to a screeching halt one night. As soon as I pulled up to my driveway, I saw it. A beat-up old truck sitting there like it belonged, parked right in the middle of my driveway. The headlights were off and there was no one inside. The thing looked like it hadn't been washed in years, with rust eating away at the sides and the bumper hanging on by a thread. I'd never seen it before, and I knew it didn't belong to anyone I knew. I sat there in my car, engine running, just staring at it. A chill ran down my spine, but I tried to brush it off. I figured maybe someone had car trouble and left it here while they went for help, but it didn't make sense. Why leave it here, in the middle of nowhere? I turned off my car and got out, keeping my keys in my hand. I glanced around, checking the area, but everything was still. The woods were dark and silent, except for the occasional rustle of leaves. My eyes kept going back to the truck, my mind racing with questions. I decided to take a closer look. As I got closer, I noticed there was something off about it. The windows were rolled up, but I could see papers strewn across the dashboard and empty soda cans on the passenger seat. It looked like someone had been living out of it. The smell hit me next, stale and sour like old food mixed with sweat. I took a step back, covering my nose. Whoever owned this thing hadn't taken care of it in a long time. I didn't want to touch it, but I needed to know if anyone was around. I knocked on the hood, listening for any kind of response. Nothing. I knocked again, harder this time, but all I got in return was silence. That's when I started to feel uneasy. My eyes drifted toward the edge of the woods where the tree line met my property. The shadows felt heavier, like something was hiding just out of sight. I turned back toward my house, feeling the urge to get inside and lock the door. I'd barely taken a step when I heard it, a faint crunch of leaves. My head snapped around and I squinted, trying to make out anything in the darkness. At first I didn't see anyone, but then I noticed movement. 3 figures, stepping out from between the trees. They didn't say a word, just stood there watching me. My heart started to race and I could feel my palms sweating. I clenched my keys tighter, my mind running through options. They were between me and my house, blocking the path. I could try to get back in my car, but I wasn't sure if they'd follow or even stop me. I took a deep breath, trying to keep calm. "Can I help you?" I called out, keeping my voice steady. No response. They just stood there, side by side, like they were waiting for something. I could barely make out their faces in the dim light, but I could see enough. The one in the middle was tall, with a thick build and broad shoulders. The other 2 were smaller, but they had the same intense, silent stare. I took a step back, keeping my eyes on them. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, my body tense and ready to run. The tall one took a step forward, and I froze. He raised a hand, pointing at me, then at the house, like he was telling me to go inside. I didn't move. Every instinct I had was telling me not to turn my back on them, not to go anywhere near that house while they were there. I glanced back at my car, weighing my options. But before I could make a decision, the tall one lowered his hand, and all 3 of them started walking toward me. I didn't wait. I turned and sprinted to the car, fumbling with the keys as I unlocked the door. I jumped in, slammed the door shut, and hit the lock button just as they reached the driveway. I turned the key, started the engine, and backed up as fast as I could, my eyes darting between them and the road ahead. They didn't follow. They just stood there, watching as I pulled away, their faces expressionless. I didn't stop to question it. I drove straight into town, parked in the lot of a gas station, and called the sheriff. The sheriff came out, listened to my story, and agreed to come back with me. By the time we got back to the house, the truck was gone, and so were the men. There was no sign of them anywhere. No tire tracks. Nothing. The sheriff gave me a look like he didn't quite believe me, but he didn't say anything. He told me to call if they came back and left it at that. I didn't sleep that night. Every noise, every shadow had me on edge, waiting for them to come back. But the night passed and they didn't show. I thought maybe it was over, just a weird encounter with some strangers passing through. But then, the next night, I heard it, a soft tapping on my window, just past midnight. I sat up, my heart pounding, and listened. The tapping came again, slow and deliberate. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking, and dialed 911. The operator answered, and I whispered to her what was happening. She told me to stay calm, that someone would be on their way, but I could barely focus on her words. I moved toward the window, keeping the lights off, and peeked out. At first, I didn't see anything. But then, just outside the edge of the light, I saw him. The tall one. He was standing right by the window, his face inches from the glass, staring in. I dropped to the floor, crawling away from the window, my heart racing. I heard him tap again, like he knew I was there, waiting for me to come back. The minutes felt like hours as I sat there, clutching my phone, barely daring to breathe. Finally, I heard the sound of a car pulling up, the flash of blue and red lights illuminating the room. I jumped up, ran to the door, and flung it open just as the sheriff got out of his car. He looked at me, then at the window, but by the time we got there, the man was gone. The sheriff searched the property, but he didn't find anything. He told me it was probably just some kids messing around, but I knew better. There was something about those men, something wrong. Over the next few days, I tried to go about my routine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still out there watching me. Every night, I'd hear things, the crunch of gravel, the faint murmur of voices, footsteps outside my window. Each time I'd call the sheriff, but by the time he arrived, they'd vanish without a trace. It went on like that for a week. Every night, they'd come back, standing just outside, watching, waiting. I tried to stay calm, tried to ignore them, but it was impossible. I barely slept, barely ate. I was constantly on edge, feeling like I was trapped in my own home. Then one night, it all stopped. I waited for the tapping, the footsteps, the voices, but there was nothing. Just silence. I stayed up all night expecting them to come back, but they didn't. It's been weeks now, and they haven't returned. But I can't shake the feeling that they're still out there watching, waiting for the right moment. And every night as I lie in bed, I listen, wondering if tonight will be the night they come back. I had been under a lot of stress for weeks. Work was piling up and the noise of the city was wearing me down. I needed to get away, clear my head. So I rented a cabin out in the woods about an hour outside of Stowe, Vermont. I'd been there before, small, cozy, right by a lake. No internet, no neighbors. Just me, the trees, and the quiet. I arrived just before sunset. The place looked exactly how I remembered it. A simple wooden cabin with a small deck overlooking the lake. The rental company had left the keys in a lockbox by the door. I grabbed my bags, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. It felt like stepping into another world. The air smelled of pine and old wood. I could hear the gentle lapping of the water outside, a soft breeze rustling through the trees. I unpacked quickly, threw on a jacket, and went outside to take in the view before it got dark. I could already feel the tension easing out of me. This was exactly what I needed. I sat on the deck for a while, just listening to the sounds of the woods, breathing in the fresh air. The sun dipped lower, and the shadows stretched long over the water. I made a mental note to wake up early and watch the sunrise. As night fell, I went inside, locked the door, and set up a small fire in the fireplace. I made myself some tea, grabbed a book, and settled in for a quiet night. The cabin was dimly lit, just the firelight flickering against the walls. It felt peaceful, safe. I read for a while, then eventually went to bed, falling asleep to the sounds of the forest outside. The first night was fine, quiet. I woke up early, made some coffee, and sat out on the deck to watch the sunrise. The lake was calm, a mirror reflecting the trees and sky. I felt like I could stay here forever. I spent the day exploring, hiking along the trails around the lake, taking in the fresh air. By the time evening rolled around, I was exhausted. I made myself a simple dinner, read by the fire for a while, then went to bed early. The second night was when things started to feel off. I was lying in bed, half asleep, when I heard something outside. It was faint, just a soft crunch of leaves, like someone was walking around the cabin. My eyes snapped open and I lay there listening, my heart pounding. The sound stopped, and everything was silent again. I told myself it was probably an animal. A deer, maybe, or a raccoon. I closed my eyes, tried to ignore it. But then I heard it again. Slow, deliberate footsteps circling around the cabin. I sat up, my body tense. The footsteps stopped, then started again, moving around the other side of the cabin. I got out of bed, tiptoed over to the window, and peered out into the darkness. I couldn't see anything, just trees and shadows. My hand went to my phone, but I remembered there was no signal out here. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. I told myself it was just an animal. There was no reason for anyone else to be out here. I went back to bed, pulling the blankets up to my chin, and tried to ignore the sounds. After a while, the footsteps stopped, and the silence returned. The next morning, I checked around the cabin looking for tracks. There was nothing. No sign that anyone, or anything, had been there. I felt a little ridiculous. Maybe it had been my imagination, or maybe I'd just been half asleep, hearing things. I shook it off and went about my day, telling myself to relax, enjoy the peace. But that night, it happened again. I was lying in bed, drifting off, when I heard the footsteps outside. This time, they were louder, closer. I sat up, my heart racing, and listened. The steps were slow, methodical, like someone was deliberately walking around the cabin, checking each side. I got out of bed, my hands shaking, and moved over to the window. This time, I saw something. A shadow moving just outside the cabin, barely visible in the moonlight. It was tall, human-shaped, but I couldn't make out any details. Just a dark figure, moving slowly, deliberately. I froze, watching. My heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. The figure moved around the cabin, stopping near the front door. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its presence, heavy and unsettling. It was watching me. I knew it, even though I couldn't see its eyes. I backed away from the window, my mind racing. There was no signal, no way to call for help. I was alone, out here in the middle of nowhere, with no neighbors for miles. I grabbed a flashlight from my bag, clutching it like a weapon, and sat in the corner of the room, waiting, listening. After what felt like hours, the footsteps faded. The silence returned, but I didn't feel safe. I barely slept that night, sitting in the dark, my eyes darting to the window every few minutes, expecting to see that shadow again. The next day, I was on edge. Every little sound made me jump. I went outside, checked the area around the cabin, but there was nothing. No footprints, no sign that anyone had been there. But I knew what I'd seen. I couldn't explain it, but I knew it was real. That night, I didn't bother trying to sleep. I sat in the living room, every light on, the flashlight in my hand. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was being paranoid. But around midnight, the footsteps started again. This time, they were louder, more deliberate. The figure moved around the cabin, stopping at each window, like it was looking for a way in. I could hear it tapping on the glass, a soft, almost polite knock, like it was asking to be let in. My stomach twisted, and I clenched the flashlight tighter. I didn't move, didn't make a sound. The knocking continued, moving from window to window, slow and steady, like it had all the time in the world. Finally, it stopped. The silence was thick, heavy, pressing down on me. I waited, my whole body tense, listening. And then, from just outside the front door, I heard it, a soft, low whisper. "Let me in." My blood ran cold. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The whisper came again, soft but insistent, like it was right on the other side of the door. "Let me in." I backed away, my hands shaking, and crouched down behind the couch, trying to make myself as small as possible. I felt trapped, helpless, like a mouse cornered by a cat. The whisper came again, more demanding this time. "Let me in." I couldn't take it anymore. I bolted to the back door, unlocked it, and ran out into the night. I didn't stop, didn't look back. I ran through the trees, branches scratching my face, my breath coming in gasps. I didn't know where I was going, just that I had to get away. After what felt like hours, I stumbled onto a dirt road. I followed it, my legs aching, my lungs burning, until I saw headlights approaching. I waved my arms, desperate, and the car slowed down, the driver rolling down his window to ask if I was okay. I don't remember what I said, just that I needed help, that someone was after me. The driver let me in, took me to the nearest town, and I called the police. They went back to the cabin, but they didn't find anything. No footprints, no signs of forced entry. They told me it was probably an animal, maybe a bear, that I'd just imagined the voice in my panic. But I know what I heard, and every night since then, I can still hear that whisper in my mind. Let me in. It was one of those evenings where I was just trying to get through the crowd at the mall, focused on picking up a few things and getting home. I'd taken my daughter, Emma, with me, and she was glued to my side, as always. She was 7, bright-eyed, and curious about everything. She held my hand, skipping along, humming some tune she'd probably heard at school. We were in Haddonfield, Illinois. Our local mall wasn't huge, but it was big enough that I had to keep a close eye on her. We were heading toward the food court, and I told her she could pick out a treat after we finished up. Her eyes lit up at that, and she gave my hand a little squeeze. We walked through the stores, glancing at the displays, and she tugged me over to look at the toys every few steps. She'd beg, and I'd tell her, maybe for your birthday, which was our usual routine. It felt like any other day. But then, in a split second, everything changed. I looked away for one moment, distracted by something in the store window, a sale sign or maybe just something that caught my eye. When I turned back, Emma wasn't there. My heart dropped. I looked around, thinking maybe she'd just wandered a few steps away. "Emma!" I called, my voice echoing down the hall. No answer. I scanned the area, eyes darting from one person to the next, looking for her little yellow jacket, her brown hair tied in that little ponytail she loved. But she was gone. Panic started bubbling up in my chest. I pushed through the crowd, calling her name, trying to keep calm, but my mind was racing. She'd never done this before, never let go of my hand without a word. I called out again, louder this time, ignoring the looks from people passing by. I must have looked like a crazy person, but I didn't care. All I cared about was finding her. I walked up to a security guard near the food court, breathless, barely able to speak. "My daughter, she's missing," I said, my voice shaking. He nodded, calm but serious, and asked me a few questions. Her age, her name, what she was wearing. I tried to answer, but the words were coming out in bits and pieces. All I could think about was that she was out there somewhere, scared, maybe crying, and I wasn't there with her. The guard radioed in, alerting his team, and they started searching. He told me to stay calm, but it felt impossible. I wanted to do something to keep looking, but they told me to wait there. I felt useless just standing around, waiting for someone to come back with news. Minutes felt like hours. I was pacing, biting my nails, glancing down every hallway, hoping I'd see her running toward me. But she never appeared. Then, after what felt like forever, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I answered it, thinking maybe it was security or someone who'd found her. But when I heard the voice on the other end, my blood went cold. "Hello, Mr. Johnson," the voice said, calm and steady. It was a man's voice, smooth and almost polite. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "You don't know me," he said, unbothered by my tone. "But I have your daughter." My stomach twisted and I felt like I was going to be sick. What do you mean? Where is she? Let me talk to her." He chuckled softly, like he found my reaction amusing. "She's safe, for now, but you're going to do exactly what I tell you if you want her back." I couldn't believe this was happening. My mind was racing, my hands shaking as I gripped the phone. I looked around, feeling trapped, not knowing who to turn to. The guard was still there, watching me with a concerned look, but I couldn't say anything. I didn't want to risk it. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Nothing complicated?" he said. "There's a door near the east exit. Go there now, alone. And don't try anything stupid." He hung up before I could respond. I stood there, frozen, trying to process what had just happened. My daughter was with some stranger, and he was calling the shots. I couldn't think straight, but I knew I had to go. Without saying a word, I turned and walked toward the east exit. The security guard called after me, but I ignored him, too focused on following the man's instructions. My mind was spinning with fear, anger, and a desperation I'd never felt before. I reached the door he'd mentioned, a heavy metal exit door that led out to the back of the mall. I pushed it open, stepping outside into the cold evening air. The alley was empty, just the dim glow of the streetlights and the quiet hum of the city in the distance. Then my phone buzzed again. Another call from the unknown number. "Good," the voice said. "Now, listen carefully. There's a black SUV parked at the end of the alley. Get in." I looked up and saw it, parked just a few yards away, its engine running. My legs felt like lead, but I forced myself to walk toward it. My hand trembled as I reached for the door handle, half expecting someone to jump out and grab me. But the car was empty. I climbed in, my heart pounding, and the door locked automatically as soon as I was inside. "Drive," the voice said through the phone. "Where are you taking me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "All in good time," he replied, his tone maddeningly calm. "Just drive." I followed his instructions, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. He directed me through the city, down side streets and back roads until we were well outside of town, heading down a narrow road surrounded by woods. The further we went, the darker it got, until there were no more streetlights, just the beams of the headlights cutting through the night. Finally, he told me to pull over near an old, abandoned building, a crumbling warehouse that looked like it hadn't been used in years. My stomach churned as I parked, glancing around, but there was no one in sight. "Get out of the car," the voice said, "and leave your phone." I hesitated, but I didn't have a choice. I left the phone on the seat, got out and stood there, the cold night air chilling me to the bone. I looked around, trying to spot any sign of movement, but the place was silent. Then, from the shadows, I saw him. A tall figure stepped out from behind the building, his face hidden under a hood. He walked toward me slowly, his hands in his pockets, and my heart pounded with every step he took. "Where's my daughter?" I demanded, my voice barely more than a whisper. He stopped a few feet away, tilting his head as he looked at me. "She's safe," he said, but I could tell he was enjoying this, the power he held over me. "You'll see her soon. But first, I need you to do something for me." I clenched my fists, trying to control the rage boiling inside me. "What do you want?" He smiled, a slow, cruel smile that sent a chill down my spine. "There's a bag in the car," he said. "Bring it here." I turned back to the car, opened the back door, and saw the bag he was talking about. It was heavy, filled with something I couldn't identify. I carried it over to him, my arms straining under the weight. "Open it," he said. I unzipped the bag and stared down at its contents. Bricks of cash, stacks upon stacks, and something that looked like a small, sealed package, maybe drugs. I looked up at him, confused, but he just nodded. "You're going to take this to an address I give you," he said, his voice cold and businesslike. "And if you call the police or try anything stupid, you'll never see your daughter again." I wanted to argue, wanted to scream at him, but I knew he was serious. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Fine," I said, "just please let me see her." He shook his head. "Not yet," he replied. "But if you do this, she'll be waiting for you when you're done." I took the bag, my mind numb, my body moving on autopilot as I got back into the car. He gave me the address, another warehouse on the outskirts of town, and I drove. the bag sitting heavy on the passenger seat. When I reached the address, I did as he asked, leaving the bag by the door and driving away without looking back. My heart was pounding, my mind racing with fear and anger, but I couldn't think about it. All I cared about was getting my daughter back. When I returned to the original spot, there she was, standing by the side of the road, unharmed but looking scared. I jumped out of the car, ran to her, and pulled her into my arms, holding her tight. She looked up at me, her eyes wide. "Daddy, who were those men?" she whispered. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that we were going home, and I would never let her out of my sight again. I'd been living in my apartment in Cedar Falls for about 6 months when I started to notice strange things about my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Whitaker. She was the quiet type, always kept to herself, but I'd see her out in her garden nearly every day. She had a big plot of land for someone living in the middle of town, and she was always tending to it, like it was her own little world. Flowers, vegetables, the whole deal. She'd smile politely when I waved, but that was it. She never talked much, which suited me just fine. Then, one day, I realized I hadn't seen her in a while. A couple of weeks, maybe. I couldn't put my finger on when exactly she'd disappeared, but suddenly her garden was looking rough. Wilted flowers, vegetables half rotting on the vine. The place looked abandoned. I shrugged it off at first. Maybe she'd gone to stay with family or something. But the more I thought about it, the more it bugged me. Mrs. Whitaker was always there, like clockwork, rain or shine. The garden was her life, and now it was just sitting there, neglected. A couple of days later, I mentioned it to the guy who lives across the hall, Tony. He was a friendly enough guy, always up for a beer. When I brought up Mrs. Whitaker, he just shrugged. "Haven't seen her," he said, not seeming too concerned. Still, something didn't sit right with me. I'd walk past her place every day, peeking in through the fence, just hoping to see her out there, but nothing. Her house was dark, the blinds drawn, no lights on in the evening. It felt wrong, like something was off. Then one night, I was lying in bed, just about to drift off, when I heard something, a faint noise like shuffling. I sat up, straining my ears, trying to figure out where it was coming from. It took me a second to realize it was coming from her place. I got up, went to the window, and looked out. Her house was dark as usual. But there it was again, that faint shuffling sound, like someone moving around inside. I couldn't see anything from my window, so I decided to go down and check it out. I wasn't trying to be a hero or anything, just curious. Maybe she was back and I was overthinking things. I grabbed my keys, slipped on some shoes, and headed over to her place. The garden looked even worse up close, weeds growing wild, plants dying left and right. I walked up to her front door, feeling a bit stupid, and knocked. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time, but still nothing. I started to turn back, figuring I'd leave it alone, but then I heard it again. The shuffling, only louder now. It was definitely coming from inside. "Mrs. Whitaker," I called out, feeling my pulse start to quicken. "Are you in there?" Silence. I tried the door, and to my surprise, it was unlocked. I hesitated, wondering if I should really be doing this, but something in me just needed to know. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The place was a mess. Dust covered every surface, and the air smelled stale, like the place hadn't been aired out in weeks. I glanced around, taking in the stacks of newspapers, the piles of dishes in the sink. This wasn't the Mrs. Whitaker I remembered. She was always so tidy, so meticulous. I called out again, my voice echoing through the empty house. "Mrs. Whitaker?" Nothing. I took a few steps further in, trying to shake off the feeling that I was trespassing. The place was eerily silent, except for that faint shuffling sound, which seemed to be coming from the back of the house. I made my way down the hallway, my footsteps muffled by the carpet. Every nerve in my body was on edge. I felt like I was intruding, like I didn't belong here. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. I reached the door to her bedroom and hesitated. The shuffling sound was louder now, just on the other side. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and pushed the door open. The room was dark, the curtains drawn tight. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. The bed was neatly made, everything in its place. But then I noticed the closet door, slightly ajar, with a faint sliver of light coming from inside. My heart was pounding now, every instinct screaming at me to turn around and leave. But I couldn't. I had to know. I took a step forward, reaching out to push the closet door open. As soon as my hand touched it, the shuffling stopped. I froze, my hand hovering in midair, every muscle in my body tense. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then slowly, I pushed the door open. Inside, crouched on the floor, was Mrs. Whitaker. She was huddled in the corner, her eyes wide and filled with terror. She looked up at me, her face pale, her hands shaking. "Mrs. Whitaker," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "What are you doing in here?" She didn't answer, just stared at me, her eyes darting around the room like she was afraid someone was watching. "Are you okay?" I asked, stepping closer. She flinched, pressing herself against the wall, like she was trying to disappear. Then in a voice so soft I could barely hear her, she whispered, "He's watching." A chill ran down my spine. "Who?" I asked, glancing around, half expecting to see someone standing in the shadows. But she just shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "He's always watching," she whispered. "He won't let me leave." I felt a surge of anger, a need to protect her from whatever or whoever had done this to her. I reached out, putting a hand on her shoulder. "Mrs. Whitaker, come on. Let's get you out of here." But she shook her head, pulling away from me. "No," she said, her voice shaking. "If I leave, he'll find me. He always does." I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to reassure her. I looked around, trying to find some sign of this he she was talking about. But there was no one else in the room, just us. "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't know who he is, but you're safe now. Let's get you to my place and we'll call the police. They can help you." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a strange mix of hope and fear. For a moment, I thought she might agree, but then her face crumpled and she shook her head. "He's here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He's always here." That's when I heard it. A faint creak from the hallway, like someone shifting their weight on the floorboards. My blood ran cold. I turned, peering into the darkness, but there was no one there. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. She nodded, her eyes wide with terror. "He's coming." I took a step back, my mind racing. Whoever this was, they weren't going to hurt her. Not if I had anything to say about it. "Stay here," I told her, even though every instinct was telling me not to leave her alone. I stepped out into the hallway, my fists clenched, ready to confront whoever was lurking in the shadows. But the hallway was empty. I moved slowly, peering into each room, searching for any sign of movement. The house was silent, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was there watching me. I reached the end of the hallway, my nerves frayed, every muscle tense. I glanced back toward the bedroom, and that's when I saw him. A shadow, just barely visible, standing at the end of the hall watching me. My breath caught in my throat, and I took a step back. But as soon as I moved, the shadow was gone, disappearing into the darkness. I turned, running back to the bedroom. But when I got there, the closet was empty. Mrs. Whitaker was gone. I searched the house, calling her name, but there was no sign of her. It was like she'd vanished into thin air. I stumbled back to my apartment, my mind racing, my heart pounding. I called the police, told them everything, but when they searched her house, they found nothing. No sign of her, no sign of anyone else. It's been weeks now, and I haven't seen her since. Her garden's still there, overgrown and wild, like it's waiting for her to come back. When I first saw him sitting at my kitchen table, I thought I was losing my mind. I mean, it was late, nearly midnight, and I'd just gotten back from a long, exhausting shift. I was rubbing my eyes, feeling that kind of tired that made my bones ache, just wanting to grab a quick snack before crashing into bed. But there he was, sitting at my table, casual as anything, with a cup of coffee in his hand, like he'd been there all along. I live in a small town called Fairfield, Ohio. Not much happens around here. People know each other and everyone keeps to themselves. I've been renting this house for a couple of years, and I know every creak in the floorboards, every weird noise from the pipes. And I knew for sure that I'd locked my door when I left. So seeing him there in my house was like being hit with ice water. I froze, standing in the doorway, my brain trying to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. He looked up like he'd only just noticed me standing there. He was older than me, maybe late 40s, with a bit of gray in his beard. He wore a plain shirt and jeans, nothing out of the ordinary. But there was something about the way he looked at me, with this calm, steady gaze that made my stomach twist. Who the hell are you? I managed to get out, my voice shaking a little. I was trying to sound tough, but it came out weak. He took a sip of coffee, his eyes never leaving mine. "Evening," he said, as if this was the most normal thing in the world. I took a step forward, glancing toward the kitchen counter. I knew there was a knife in the drawer just a few feet away. "How did you get in here?" He shrugged, still looking at me like he knew something I didn't. "Does it matter?" My heart was pounding, and I felt a bead of sweat start to trickle down my back. "Yeah, it matters. This is my house. You're not supposed to be here." He set the coffee cup down, folding his hands on the table in front of him. "Is it, though?" I didn't know what he meant by that, but it rattled me. I clenched my fists, trying to think of what to do next. "Look, I don't know who you think you are, but you need to get out of here now." He smiled, just a small, strange smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm not going anywhere." The calmness in his voice sent a chill through me. I was staring at him, trying to figure out if I could take him on. He didn't look big, but there was something solid about him, like he was planted there, unmoving. I took another step toward the counter, my hand inching toward the drawer with the knife. He noticed. "That's not going to help you," he said, his voice still calm. I stopped, my hand hovering over the drawer. "What do you want?" He tilted his head, like he was considering the question. "I just wanted to see you." That made no sense. "See me? What are you talking about? I don't even know you." He leaned back in the chair, crossing his arms. "Don't you?" I swallowed, feeling my pulse race. He wasn't making any sense, but he wasn't leaving either. I felt trapped, like I couldn't move, couldn't do anything except stand there and wait for him to make the next move. Finally, I forced myself to speak. "If you don't leave, I'm calling the cops." He raised an eyebrow, amused. "Go ahead." His confidence, that look in his eyes, it was like he knew something I didn't. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking, and dialed 911. But when I looked up, he was gone. The chair was empty, the coffee cup still sitting on the table. I blinked, staring at the spot where he'd been, my brain scrambling to make sense of it. I hadn't heard him get up, hadn't heard a door open. He'd just vanished. I lowered the phone, my mind racing. Maybe I was overtired, maybe I'd imagined it. But the coffee cup was still there, still half full, still warm to the touch. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch, every light in the house on, clutching my phone, waiting for some sign of him to come back. But nothing happened. The house was silent, and eventually the adrenaline faded, leaving me exhausted and jittery. The next day, I convinced myself it was just a one-time thing. Maybe he'd been a drifter. Maybe he'd somehow slipped out while I wasn't looking. I told myself I'd been overreacting, that he wouldn't come back, but he did. The next night, I came home late again, and there he was, sitting in the same chair, with the same calm expression on his face. "You're back," he said, like he'd been expecting me. I stopped in my tracks, my stomach churning. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He smiled, that same strange smile. "Just to talk." "About what?" He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit down." I didn't move. Every instinct was screaming at me to get out of the house, to run, to call for help. But he just sat there waiting, like he knew I wasn't going anywhere. Reluctantly, I walked over and sat down, my body tense, ready to bolt at any moment. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Do you know who I am?" I shook my head, swallowing hard. "No, and I don't want to know. I just want you to leave." He ignored that. "Think back," he said. "You've seen me before." I searched my memory, trying to remember his face, but nothing came to mind. He was just an ordinary-looking guy, someone I would have walked past without a second thought. But there was something familiar about him, something I couldn't quite place. "I don't know you," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. He sighed, almost like he was disappointed. "You will." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What does that mean?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small old photograph. He slid it across the table to me, his eyes never leaving mine. I looked down, my heart pounding. It was a picture of me, much younger, maybe 5 or 6 years old, standing outside a house I didn't recognize. Next to me was a man, his arm around my shoulders, smiling down at me. I couldn't make out his face. It was blurred, like the photo had been damaged over time. Where did you get this?" I stammered, my mind reeling. He leaned back, his expression unreadable. "I've always had it." I looked at him, my hands shaking, the photo clutched in my fingers. "Who are you?" He didn't answer. He just got up, calm as ever, and walked to the door. I watched him go, too stunned to move, too scared to stop him. He paused at the door, glancing back at me. "See you soon," he said, and then he was gone. I sat there, staring at the door, my mind racing. The photo was still in my hand, proof that he'd been there, that it wasn't just some hallucination. The days after that were a blur. I couldn't focus at work, couldn't sleep, couldn't think about anything except him. Every night I'd come home, half expecting to find him sitting there again, but he never showed up. The house was empty, silent, like he'd never been there. But I knew he'd be back. I could feel it, a cold certainty that settled in my bones. And every time I looked at that photo, I felt that same dread, that same gnawing fear. He was out there somewhere waiting, and I knew that one day he'd come back. I'm not an outdoorsy type, but after months of staring at screens and dealing with constant noise at work, I needed a break. I decided to go camping on my own. Just a couple of nights out in nature. No emails, no calls, just peace and quiet. I found a small campground a couple of hours away from home, near the outskirts of Blackwood, a small town that barely shows up on most maps. I got there in the late afternoon, set up my tent, and took a look around. The campground was empty, exactly what I wanted, just me and the trees. There was a small trail leading down to a creek a few hundred feet from my tent, and the whole place was surrounded by thick woods. I liked it, felt private, isolated, a good place to get away from everything. After setting up, I built a small fire, cooked some food, and just sat there, listening to the sounds of the forest. Birds, the occasional rustle of leaves, the crackle of the fire. It was peaceful, just like I'd imagined. As the sun started to set, I could feel the tension from the last few months slipping away. I hadn't felt this relaxed in a long time. The first night was uneventful. I crawled into my sleeping bag, listened to the sounds outside, and drifted off. I woke up a few times just from not being used to sleeping outside, but it was nothing major. When morning came, I felt good. I got up, made some coffee, and decided to take a walk around the area. I spent most of the day exploring, following the trail by the creek, just letting my mind wander. When I got back to camp, it was late afternoon, and I noticed something odd right away. There were footprints in the dirt around my tent. At first, I thought maybe I'd made them myself, but they didn't match the pattern of my boots. They were bigger, deeper. Someone else had been here. I looked around trying to see if there was anyone nearby, but the place was as empty as before. I hadn't seen a single person since I'd arrived. My mind was racing, trying to come up with a reason why someone would be walking around my camp. Maybe a park ranger had come by, but I hadn't seen any vehicles, hadn't heard anyone. I felt a bit uneasy, but I told myself it was nothing. Maybe someone had just wandered through and left. I pushed it out of my mind, built up the fire again, and tried to enjoy the evening. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As night fell, I tried to relax, listening to the fire crackling, the wind rustling through the trees. But every so often I'd hear something, a faint snap of a twig, a rustle in the bushes. I'd shine my flashlight around, but there was nothing there, just darkness and shadows. I eventually convinced myself to go to bed, though I couldn't shake that uneasy feeling. I crawled into my tent, zipped it up tight, and lay there, listening. The woods were quiet, almost too quiet. I strained my ears, listening for any sign of movement outside, but after a while I drifted off, my body too tired to stay alert. Sometime in the middle of the night I woke up. At first I wasn't sure why. Everything was silent, and I could still hear the faint crackle of the fire outside. I lay there, my mind foggy, when I heard it, a faint crunch of footsteps close to my tent. My heart started pounding, and I held my breath, listening. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, like someone was circling my tent. I reached for my flashlight, trying not to make a sound. I clicked it on, pointing it at the walls of the tent, but I couldn't see anything through the fabric. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment everything was silent. I thought maybe whoever it was had left, but then I heard a soft scraping sound, like something brushing against the side of the tent. I froze, my hand gripping the flashlight so tightly my knuckles hurt. I thought about calling out, but I didn't want to give away my position. Instead, I stayed still, barely breathing, waiting for the next sound. The scraping stopped, replaced by the faint crunch of footsteps moving away from the tent. I listened, counting each step, until the sound faded into the distance. I lay there for what felt like hours, too scared to move. My mind was racing, trying to figure out who or what was out there. Part of me wanted to get out of the tent to check if they were gone, but I couldn't bring myself to move. I stayed like that until the first light of dawn crept through the fabric of the tent. When I finally stepped outside, everything looked normal. The fire had burned down to embers, the woods were quiet, and there was no sign of anyone around. But then I looked down and saw the footprints. They were all around the tent, circling it in a tight loop. The prints were deep, each step pressed into the dirt like the person had been standing still for a while before moving. My stomach twisted as I realized they led away from the tent, disappearing into the woods. I felt a surge of fear, followed by anger. Whoever had been out here had been messing with me, trying to scare me. I wanted to track them down, to confront them, but I knew it was a stupid idea. I was alone, with no cell service, and if something went wrong, no one would know. I spent the day on edge, constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. But the woods were empty, silent, almost like they were holding their breath. I kept my fire going all day, adding more wood than I needed, just to keep myself busy, to feel like I had some control. As night fell, I sat by the fire, clutching my flashlight, my knife close by. I kept my back to the tent, my eyes scanning the trees, watching for any sign of movement. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made my heart race. Sometime in the middle of the night, the footsteps came back. I heard them before I saw anything. That slow, deliberate crunch of leaves. My grip on the flashlight tightened, and I pointed it toward the sound, my heart hammering in my chest. The footsteps stopped, and I could see a shadow just beyond the reach of the firelight. A figure standing there, watching me. I couldn't make out any details, just the outline of a person, tall and still. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice sounding small and shaky. No answer. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just stood there, watching. I felt a surge of anger mixed with fear. "I don't know what you want, but you need to leave," I shouted, my voice shaking. Still, nothing. The figure just stood there, motionless, like it was waiting for something. I grabbed a stick from the fire, holding it up like a torch, and took a step toward the figure. But as soon as I moved, it disappeared, melting back into the darkness like it had never been there. I stayed up the rest of the night, the stick still burning in my hand, my eyes scanning the woods. But the figure didn't come back. When morning came, I packed up my gear, not bothering to eat or even put out the fire properly. I just wanted to get out of there. As I left, I glanced back one last time and my heart skipped a beat. In the dirt, right where the figure had been standing, was a single set of footprints, leading off into the trees. I live alone in a quiet neighborhood in Willows Creek, Montana. It's the kind of place where nothing much happens. Families live here, people walk their dogs, kids play in the streets. It's quiet, and that's what I liked about it. My house is at the end of a cul-de-sac, so I don't get any traffic, and no one really comes by unless they're delivering something. I moved here for the peace and quiet. That was a mistake. It was late, maybe a little past midnight, and I'd just settled into bed. I'd had a long day at work and was looking forward to getting some solid sleep. Everything was still, the neighborhood silent. I closed my eyes, letting myself drift off. Then, the doorbell rang. I shot up, heart pounding, confused. My mind raced. Who would be at my door at this hour? I grabbed my phone, glancing at the time, 12:17 a.m. I waited, hoping it was just a prank, that maybe someone had rung it by mistake. But after a few seconds, it rang again, longer this time, like whoever was out there wanted to make sure I heard it. I got out of bed, trying to ignore the prickling at the back of my neck. My first instinct was to look out the window to see who was there, but my bedroom was at the back of the house. The only way I'd see the front door was if I went down the hall. The doorbell rang again, that same long, insistent ring. I took a deep breath, telling myself it was probably nothing. Maybe a neighbor needed help, or maybe someone's car broke down nearby. I grabbed my phone and walked down the hall toward the front door. As I got closer, I realized something was off. There were no footsteps on the porch, no shadows under the door. It was like whoever was ringing the bell was just standing there, waiting. I reached the door, hesitating, my hand hovering over the doorknob. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding shaky. "Who's there?" Silence. The kind that fills your ears, heavy and thick. I pressed my ear against the door, listening. Nothing. No movement, no breathing, no footsteps. I took a deep breath and looked through the peephole, half expecting to see someone staring back at me. But the porch was empty. The streetlights cast a faint glow, illuminating the driveway and the yard, but there was no one there. I blinked, feeling a cold trickle of fear creep up my spine. Then, the doorbell rang again. I jumped back, my heart pounding, and looked through the peephole once more. Still no one. I didn't understand. I just checked, and there was no one there. It didn't make any sense. I thought about opening the door just to get it over with, but something in me resisted. Instead, I called out again, louder this time. "Is someone out there?" Nothing. No answer, no sound. Just that empty silence. I stood there, unsure of what to do, when my phone buzzed. I glanced down at it, hoping it was a text or a call from someone I knew, but there was nothing. Just a notification that my security camera had picked up movement at the front door. I opened the app, my hands shaking, and hit play on the video. The feed showed my empty porch, the camera picking up the faint light from the street. I fast-forwarded, watching the seconds tick by. No movement, no one in sight. But then, right as the doorbell rang, I saw it. Just a faint blur, like someone moving too fast for the camera to catch. My skin prickled. I rewound the video, watching that same spot over and over. It wasn't clear, just a faint blur, a distortion. It was as if something was there, but not quite. Like it was slipping through just on the edge of the camera's view. The doorbell rang again, snapping me back to the present. This time it was longer, more insistent, like someone was leaning on the button. I stepped back from the door, my mind racing. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to throw open the door, confront whatever was out there. But another part of me, the part that was cold with fear, told me to stay put. I grabbed my phone again and dialed 911, my hands trembling. The operator picked up and I stammered out my story, feeling ridiculous even as I said it. Someone was ringing my doorbell, but there was no one there. I could almost hear her doubt over the line, but she assured me they'd send someone over to check it out. I hung up and waited, pacing the hall, glancing at the door every few seconds. The doorbell didn't ring again, but I could feel it. Something was out there. Watching. Waiting. After what felt like forever, I saw the flash of headlights outside and a patrol car pulled up in front of my house. I opened the door, stepping out onto the porch as the officer approached. "Good evening," he said, looking at me with that calm, professional expression. "You called about someone ringing your doorbell?" I nodded, feeling a bit embarrassed now that he was actually here.
Yeah, it's been ringing on and off for the past half hour, but there's no one here. I checked the camera, but... He raised an eyebrow. "Did you check around the house? Sometimes kids play pranks like this." I shook my head.
"I didn't want to go out there alone." He nodded, looking around. "Stay here. I'll take a look." I watched him walk around the side of the house, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. I hugged myself, feeling the chill of the night air. The silence felt heavier now, more oppressive. After a few minutes, he came back, shaking his head. "There's no one here. No footprints, no signs of anyone hanging around. Are you sure you didn't imagine it?" I opened my mouth to argue, but then I stopped. The truth was I wasn't sure anymore. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe I was overtired, jumpy from the stress of work. I felt ridiculous standing there in my pajamas trying to convince him that something was wrong. I don't know," I mumbled, feeling my face heat up. "Maybe I did imagine it." He nodded, giving me a reassuring smile. "It happens. If anything else happens, just give us a call." I thanked him, watching as he got back in his car and drove off, leaving me alone in the quiet darkness. I went back inside, closing and locking the door behind me. I stood there for a moment, listening to the silence, trying to convince myself that it was over. But as I turned to head back to bed, the doorbell rang again. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. I turned, looking at the door, my mind racing. The police had just been here, they hadn't seen anyone. But the doorbell kept ringing long and steady, like someone was pressing down hard on the button. I walked to the door, my hands shaking, and looked through the peephole. The porch was empty. No one was there. But the ringing didn't stop. I backed away, feeling a surge of panic. I didn't know what to do. The sound was filling the house, relentless, pressing in on me. I covered my ears, trying to block it out, but it kept going, louder and louder, like it was echoing inside my head. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence was deafening. I stood there, my body tense, waiting for the next ring, but it never came. I let out a shaky breath, my hands still trembling, and turned to go back to bed. That's when I saw it. On the floor, just inside the door, was a small, crumpled piece of paper. I stared at it, my mind struggling to make sense of it. I hadn't seen it there before. It wasn't there when I opened the door for the officer. I reached down, my hand shaking, and picked it up. The paper was cold, almost icy to the touch. I unfolded it, my breath catching as I read the words scrawled in shaky handwriting. "I'm already inside." The room felt like it was closing in on me. I looked around, every shadow, every corner suddenly filled with menace. I backed away, the paper still clutched in my hand, my heart racing. I don't remember how long I stood there, staring at the walls, listening for any sound, any hint that someone else was there. But nothing happened. The house was silent, empty. After a while, I made my way to the couch, too scared to go back to my room, too afraid to be alone in the dark. I sat there, every light in the house on, clutching my phone, my eyes darting around the room. I didn't sleep that night. And in the morning, when the light finally came through the windows, I packed a bag and left. I haven't been back since. I'd just left a late shift at the hospital, exhausted and ready to collapse. It was past midnight, and the roads were empty. I live a little outside of Charleston, West Virginia, so my drive home takes me through a stretch of highway with hardly any lights or signs of life. It's quiet, remote, and honestly, I'd always liked it that way. But that night, something changed. I got into my car, buckled up, and pulled out onto the road. The darkness swallowed everything outside the headlights. The only sounds were the hum of the engine and the faint static of the radio. I settled in, trying to shake off the weariness that clung to me, my eyes trained on the road ahead. I was maybe 10 minutes out of town when I noticed a pair of headlights behind me. I didn't think much of it at first, just another driver heading home. But the longer I drove, the closer those lights seemed to get. They were bright, too close, almost blinding in my rearview mirror. I tried to ignore it, figuring they'd pass me soon enough. But they didn't. They just hung there, too close, matching my speed no matter how fast or slow I went. I felt a flicker of irritation, then unease. It was late, and there was no reason for anyone to be tailgating me like that on an empty road. I tapped the brakes, hoping they'd get the hint and back off. Instead, the headlights flashed, bright and harsh, as if the driver was trying to signal me. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my pulse picking up. I couldn't see the car itself, just the blinding glare of the lights. I told myself to stay calm, to focus on the road. Maybe they were just impatient. Maybe they were lost. But as I kept driving, I realized that whoever was behind me wasn't going anywhere. They were following me. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my hands steady on the wheel. I glanced at the gas gauge. Half a tank left, plenty to get me home. I told myself to just keep driving, that they'd eventually turn off or pass me. But something about the way they stayed so close, so relentlessly close, made my skin crawl. After a few more miles, I made a sudden decision to test them. I turned off onto a narrow side road, one that led to an old service station. It wasn't far, and I figured if they followed me there, it meant they were deliberately tailing me. I took the turn, my heart pounding, and watched as the headlights behind me slowed, then followed. My stomach twisted. This wasn't a coincidence. They were following me. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead as I pulled into the empty parking lot of the service station. I parked near the building under one of the few working lights and waited, watching the road, my pulse pounding in my ears. For a moment, there was nothing but darkness. The headlights disappeared and I felt a flicker of hope, thinking maybe they'd given up. But then I saw it, a car pulling slowly into the lot, coming to a stop a few spaces away from me. I squinted, trying to make out the driver, but the windows were tinted dark, impossible to see through. The car just sat there, engine running, headlights off, like it was waiting for something. I felt trapped, my mind racing with options. I could get out and confront them, but that seemed like a terrible idea. I could call someone, but who? It was late, and I was alone, miles away from home. I decided to stay in the car, keeping my doors locked, my fingers gripping the steering wheel. I didn't take my eyes off the car, waiting, hoping they'd just leave, but they didn't move. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching longer than the last. I checked my phone, thinking about calling 911, but I hesitated. What would I say? That someone was just sitting there? They hadn't done anything yet, hadn't approached me, but the longer they sat there, the more certain I became that this wasn't just a coincidence. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I started the car, my hands trembling, and pulled out of the parking lot. I turned back toward the highway, driving slowly, hoping they wouldn't follow. But as soon as I hit the road, I saw the headlights behind me again. They were closer this time, practically on my bumper, bright and blinding. My heart raced, panic clawing at my throat. I didn't know what they wanted, didn't understand why they were doing this, but I knew I had to get away. I pressed down on the gas, pushing the car faster, my eyes flicking between the road and the rearview mirror. But no matter how fast I went, they stayed right behind me, those blinding headlights filling the mirror, making it impossible to see anything else. I took another turn, this time onto a winding back road, hoping to lose them in the curves, but they matched every move, every twist and turn, like they knew the road as well as I did. My hands were slick with sweat, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. I felt trapped, the weight of the darkness pressing in on me, those relentless headlights burning into my eyes. Then, up ahead, I saw a small dirt road cutting off to the right. It wasn't much more than a trail, but I took it without thinking, my tires kicking up dust as I veered off the main road. I hoped it would lead somewhere, anywhere, where I could get away from them. For a moment, I thought I'd lost them. The headlights faded and I could only see the dim outline of trees on either side of me, the road winding deeper into the woods. But then, just as quickly, the headlights reappeared, closer than ever, like they'd been waiting for me to make that turn. My heart pounded and I felt a wave of fear wash over me. I knew these roads well, but I'd never taken this trail. I didn't know where it led, didn't know if it would even take me back to the highway. I just kept driving, my only focus on putting distance between me and the car behind me. Then suddenly the road ended. I hit the brakes, my car skidding to a stop in a small clearing surrounded by trees. There was no way forward, no other roads, just an empty patch of dirt and silence. I turned off the engine, listening, my whole body tense. The headlights were still behind me, but they'd stopped at the edge of the clearing. I could see the car now, dark and ominous, its lights illuminating the trees, casting long shadows across the ground. I held my breath, waiting, watching, but they didn't move. They just sat there watching me. My mind raced with options, but none of them felt right. I could get out and run, but where would I go? The woods were dense, the night pitch black. I could stay in the car, but I felt like a sitting duck, trapped, exposed. Then slowly, the car started to inch forward, creeping toward me, closing the distance. My heart pounded, and I felt a surge of panic. I had to do something, had to get out of there. I took a deep breath, started the engine, and threw the car into reverse, my tires spinning in the dirt. I backed up, swerving around them, and hit the gas, speeding back down the trail, not daring to look back. I could hear the sound of their engine behind me, the roar of their tires as they followed, relentless, unyielding. I pushed the car as fast as it would go, my eyes glued to the road, my whole body tense. The trail was narrow, winding, and I had to fight to keep control, my hands white-knuckled on the wheel. Every turn, every bump felt like a risk, but I didn't dare slow down. I could still see their headlights in my mirror, close, too close, like they were right on my bumper. I hit the main road, not slowing down, my only thought to get as far away as possible. The headlights followed, but then, just as suddenly as they'd appeared, they vanished. I didn't stop, didn't look back. I drove all the way home, my heart pounding, my mind reeling. I parked in my driveway, sitting there in the dark, trying to calm down, trying to make sense of what had happened. But when I looked in the rearview mirror, my blood ran cold. There, on the back seat, was a note, scrawled in shaky handwriting. "See you soon." I jumped out of the car, my pulse racing, and ran inside, locking the door behind me. I called the police, but they didn't find anything. Didn't see any sign of the car or whoever had left that note. It's been weeks now, and I haven't seen any sign of them. But every time I get into my car, I can't help but check the back seat, my heart pounding, waiting, dreading the moment those headlights will appear again. I'd been traveling for work, staying at hotels more often than I liked. On this trip, I ended up in a place called Pine Falls, Washington. It was a small town, nothing fancy, just a few blocks of shops, a couple of gas stations, and a diner. The hotel was just outside of town, an old rundown place that had seen better days. But it was the only option around, and I didn't mind. I just needed a bed to crash in for the night. When I checked in, the receptionist barely looked up. She slid a room key across the counter, mumbled something about the elevator being broken, and went back to her phone. I grabbed my bag, found the stairs, and climbed up to the third floor, where my room was supposed to be. The place was practically empty. The hallways were dim and the carpet was worn and stained. It smelled like stale smoke and cleaning supplies, the kind of scent that sticks with you even after you leave. I found my room, number 312, and unlocked the door, pushing it open with a creak. The room was basic: a bed, a nightstand, a small TV on a dresser, and a single window with heavy, faded curtains. It wasn't much, but it'd do. I tossed my bag on the bed, kicked off my shoes, and sat down, feeling the mattress sink under my weight. I was exhausted. I didn't bother unpacking. I just pulled out my laptop, checked my emails, and settled in for the night. After a while, I started to feel hungry, so I decided to head down to the diner I'd passed on the way in. It was late, but I figured they'd still be open. I grabbed my wallet, locked the door behind me, and headed downstairs. The lobby was empty, the receptionist gone, so I didn't bother saying anything to anyone. I just walked out, got in my car, and drove down to the diner. When I got back, the hotel looked even more deserted than before. The parking lot was empty and the lobby was dark except for a single light over the front desk. I headed up the stairs yawning, ready to crawl into bed. But when I reached the third floor, something felt off. The hallway was darker than I remembered, the air stale and cold. I shook it off as my mind playing tricks on me, just the fatigue and the late hour messing with my head. I walked down the hall, counting the doors, looking for room 312. But when I got to where it should have been, there was nothing. Just a blank wall, as if the room had never been there. I stopped, staring at the wall, my mind struggling to make sense of it. I'd been tired, sure, but I knew I hadn't imagined the room. I remembered the creak of the door, the heavy smell of the curtains. I'd left my bag there, my laptop on the bed. I turned, scanning the hallway, looking for any sign of a door, any hint that the room was there. But there was nothing. Just a blank stretch of wall between rooms 311 and 313, like room 312 had never existed. A cold knot of fear started to form in my stomach. I tried to tell myself it was a mistake, that maybe I'd gone to the wrong floor, but I knew that wasn't right. I'd counted the doors. I'd walked down the same hallway not more than an hour ago. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, and went back down to the lobby. The receptionist was there, her head bent over a magazine. I walked up to the counter, my hands shaking slightly, and cleared my throat. She looked up, raising an eyebrow like she didn't recognize me. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone flat. "Yeah, I swallowed, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm staying in room 312, but I can't find it." She stared at me for a moment, her eyes narrowing. "Room 312? "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Third floor down the hall. I was just there a little while ago, but now there's no door." Her expression didn't change. She just looked at me like I was crazy. "Sir, we don't have a room 312. I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean?" "I checked in earlier tonight. You gave me the key." She shook her head, her tone dismissive. "You must be mistaken. Our rooms only go up to 311. There's no 312. I opened my mouth to argue, but something about the way she was looking at me made the words die in my throat. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what she was saying, but it didn't make any sense. "I left my stuff up there," I finally managed to say, my voice weak. "My bag, my laptop." She sighed, like she'd heard this a million times before. "Sir, I don't know what to tell you. There's no room 312. I wanted to argue, to insist, but a creeping sense of dread stopped me. I nodded, mumbling some excuse, and backed away from the counter, feeling her eyes on me as I left the lobby. I went back up to the third floor, my footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. I didn't know what I expected to find, but I had to see for myself. I walked down the hall, counting the doors, my heart pounding with every step. 311, a blank wall, 3 at 13. There was nothing there. I stood there, staring at the wall, feeling like I was losing my mind. I knew the room had been there. I'd checked in, opened the door, left my things inside, but now it was gone, like it had never existed. I didn't know what to do. I was exhausted, my mind racing, trying to make sense of something that didn't make any sense at all. I turned, heading back down the hallway, and almost ran into a man standing just a few feet away. He was tall, with dark hair and a serious expression, dressed in a suit that looked a little too clean, a little too neat for a place like this. He stared at me, his eyes cold, unblinking. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. I took a step back, my heart racing. Yeah. I'm looking for my room 312. He didn't react, just kept staring at me with that same cold, detached expression. "There is no room 312, he said, his voice flat. I felt a surge of frustration mixed with fear. I know what I saw. I checked in, I left my things in there. He tilted his head, his gaze unwavering. "You must be mistaken." I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but something about the way he was looking at me made me feel small, insignificant, like I was the one who was out of place, who didn't belong here. I don't understand," I mumbled, my voice barely more than a whisper. He took a step closer, his eyes fixed on mine. "You should leave," he said, his tone firm, almost commanding. "There's nothing for you here." I opened my mouth to protest, but the words wouldn't come. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead, my heart pounding in my chest. I backed away, nodding numbly, and turned, heading for the stairs. I didn't stop until I was outside, the cool night air hitting me like a slap in the face. I stood there, breathing hard, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The hotel loomed behind me, dark and silent, like a shadow. I didn't go back inside. I got in my car, my hands shaking, and drove away, leaving Pine Falls behind me. It's been weeks now, and I still can't shake the memory of that night. I tried to call the hotel to get some kind of explanation, but every time I dial the number, I get a message saying the line has been disconnected. I don't know what happened to room 312, or who that man was, or why the receptionist acted like she'd never seen me before. But I know one thing: I'm never going back to Pine Falls. I'd been up all night going through paperwork for a new project at work. By the time I finally decided to call it a night, it was almost 4 a.m., and I was dead on my feet. All I wanted was to crash into bed and get a few hours of sleep before I had to face another day. I live in a quiet neighborhood in Elk Grove, California. Nothing exciting ever really happens around here, and that's the way I like it. People keep to themselves. Kids play in their yards, and the only sounds are the occasional dog barking or lawnmower humming. Peaceful, predictable, just the way I want it. But that night, or rather, early morning, something changed. I'd just crawled into bed, pulled the covers up, and closed my eyes when my phone rang. The sound was loud in the silence, and it made me jump. I reached over, squinting at the screen, half expecting it to be a spam call, even at this hour. But the screen just showed unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me pick up. I cleared my throat and answered, my voice a bit hoarse. "Hello?" Silence. I waited, thinking maybe the call had dropped. But then I heard it. Breathing. Slow, steady breathing. Right on the other end. "Hello?" I said again, louder this time, feeling a flicker of annoyance. More breathing. Then, a faint, almost whispery voice. "Don't go outside." I sat up, my heart skipping a beat. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice sharper now. "What do you want?" But there was only silence, then a click. The call disconnected. I stared at my phone, feeling a prickle of unease. It was probably a prank, I told myself. Some kid trying to freak me out. I set the phone back down, trying to ignore the weird feeling creeping over me. I lay back down, closed my eyes, and tried to sleep. But every time I drifted off, I'd hear that whisper again, echoing in my mind. Don't go outside. It didn't make any sense, but I couldn't shake it. After a while, I gave up on sleep and sat up, rubbing my eyes. I checked the time, 4:30 a.m. The sun would be coming up soon. I thought about making some coffee, maybe trying to get a head start on my day when I heard it. A soft knock at my front door. I froze, my pulse quickening. I live alone, and it's not exactly normal to get visitors at this hour. I glanced at my phone, half expecting it to ring again, but it was silent. The knock came again, a little louder this time, more insistent. I stood up, heart pounding, and crept toward the door. I didn't turn on any lights, didn't want whoever was out there to know I was awake. I reached the door, stood on my toes, and looked through the peephole. There was no one there. I frowned, my heart still racing, and pressed my ear against the door, listening. But there was only silence. I was about to turn away when the knock came again, louder now, almost a pounding. I jumped back, my mind racing. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? That someone knocked on my door at dawn? I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, and slowly reached for the doorknob. But then I remembered the voice on the phone. Don't go outside. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob, that warning echoing in my mind. It was probably nothing, I told myself. Just a prank caller, someone with too much time on their hands. But still, I felt a chill run down my spine. The knocking stopped. I waited, my whole body tense, listening, but there was nothing. Just silence. I took a step back, still staring at the door, trying to decide what to do. Then my phone rang again. I grabbed it, my hands shaking, and looked at the screen. Unknown number. I felt a surge of anger mixed with fear and answered, my voice sharp. Who is this? What do you want? The same slow, steady breathing. Then, the voice again, soft and chilling. Don't go outside. Don't open the door. My heart was pounding now, my mind racing. Who are you? I demanded. What is this? But there was no answer. Just breathing, then another click as the call disconnected. I stood there clutching the phone, my pulse racing. I didn't know what to do, didn't know if I should ignore it or take it seriously. It felt like a prank, but there was something about that voice, something that made my skin crawl. I decided to wait it out, see if they'd leave. I backed away from the door, keeping my eyes on it, listening for any sound, any hint that someone was still there. Minutes passed, and the sun began to rise, casting a faint glow through the windows. I finally let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding and went to make some coffee, trying to shake off the fear that still lingered. I was pouring my coffee when the knock came again, this time on the window. I spun around, my heart hammering, and stared at the window over the sink. The blinds were closed, but I could see a faint shadow, like someone standing just outside, waiting. I backed away, my mind racing, every instinct telling me not to go near the window. I thought about calling the police again, but I still didn't know what to say. It felt surreal, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Then my phone buzzed again. Another call from unknown number. I didn't want to answer, didn't want to hear that voice again, but I couldn't ignore it. I pressed the answer button, holding the phone to my ear, my hands shaking. Don't look, the voice whispered. Don't look at the window. I felt a cold chill spread through me. Who are you? I whispered, my voice barely audible. Silence. Then, just before the call disconnected, I heard one last whisper. They're watching. The line went dead, and I stood there, frozen, staring at the phone in my hand. I didn't understand what was happening, didn't know who was calling me or why, but I knew one thing. Something was out there, something that didn't want me to look. I backed away from the window, my whole body tense, and sat down on the floor, clutching my phone, my mind racing. I waited, barely breathing, listening for any sound. Hours passed, and the sun rose higher, flooding the room with light. But I didn't feel safe. Every time I looked at the window, I felt that same chill, that same creeping fear that someone was watching me. I finally got up the courage to check the window, pulling the blinds aside just a crack. But there was no one there. The yard was empty, the street quiet, like nothing had happened. But I knew better. I knew they were still out there, waiting, watching. And every night since then, I've heard it. The knock at the door, the tap at the window, the ring of my phone. And every time that same voice whispering, warning me, don't go outside, don't look, they're watching. I was on a business trip in a small town in northern Michigan, a place called Iron Falls. It was the kind of town that doesn't see many visitors outside of hunting season, the kind of place where everything shuts down by 8 p.m. I'd checked into the only hotel around, a 3-story building that had definitely seen better days. The carpets were worn, the wallpaper was peeling in places, and the faint smell of mildew hung in the air. But it was a bed, and that was all I needed. I checked in, the receptionist handing me my key without much of a greeting. She seemed distracted, her eyes constantly darting to the dark hallway behind her. The whole interaction was quick and uneasy, but I didn't think much of it at the time. I was tired, just wanted to get to my room, catch up on some emails, and get a good night's sleep. My room was on the second floor, room 215. I climbed the creaky stairs and found my door, pushing it open to reveal a standard room. Bed, dresser, a small desk under a dim light. The bed looked comfortable enough, and I threw my bag on it, glad to finally be off the road. I spent the next couple of hours working, the hum of my laptop filling the silence. It was a quiet night, no traffic outside, no other guests in sight. The silence was almost oppressive, and it made the room feel colder than it should have been. I tried to focus, but something felt off, like I was being watched. I glanced around the room, checked the door to make sure it was locked, and went back to work, telling myself I was just being paranoid. Around midnight, I decided to call it a night. I was brushing my teeth, the bathroom light flickering a little, when I heard something strange. It was faint, like a murmur, coming from somewhere beyond the wall. I paused, listening closely, but it faded away. I shrugged it off, figuring it was just old pipes or maybe another guest in the room next to mine. I finished up in the bathroom, turned off the lights, and climbed into bed. The room was pitch dark, and the silence returned, pressing down on me. Then, just as I was drifting off, I heard it again. A low, muffled voice, almost like a whisper, coming from the wall behind the bed. It was closer this time, more distinct, but I couldn't make out the words. I sat up, my heart pounding, straining my ears to listen. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely more than a whisper. Silence. I told myself it was just the old building settling, maybe the wind outside. But a part of me wasn't convinced. I got out of bed, pressing my ear against the wall, trying to hear it again. Nothing. I crawled back into bed, trying to ignore the unease creeping over me. I pulled the covers up to my chin, closed my eyes, and forced myself to relax. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Then, just as I was about to fall asleep, I heard a knock. It was soft, barely audible, but it was definitely a knock, coming from somewhere down the hall. I sat up, my heart racing. I listened, waiting, but the knock didn't come again. I glanced at the clock, 2:03 a.m. I figured it was just someone arriving late, maybe having trouble finding their room, but the knock had sounded strange, like it wasn't coming from the hallway but from inside the walls. I sat there trying to calm myself, telling myself I was imagining things, but the silence was heavy and I felt trapped, like something was watching me, just waiting for me to close my eyes. After a while, I forced myself to lie back down. I took a few deep breaths, trying to shake off the fear, telling myself it was just an old building, just my imagination. I closed my eyes, waiting for sleep to take me. And then, suddenly I felt it, a cold breeze brushing against my face. My eyes snapped open and I saw that the door to my room was ajar. I was sure I'd locked it, deadbolted it before I went to bed. But now it was open, just a crack, like someone had been there and left. I got up, my hands shaking, and checked the hallway. It was empty, silent. I closed the door, made sure the lock was secure, and went back to bed, feeling more unsettled than ever. But as I lay there staring at the ceiling, I heard something again. This time it was a faint scraping sound like something dragging along the floor, coming from the room next to mine. I sat up, straining to listen, but it stopped as suddenly as it had started. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. I got out of bed, walked over to the wall, and knocked softly, just to see if anyone was in the room next to mine. Nothing. I decided to go down to the lobby, see if the receptionist could tell me who was in the room next to mine. Maybe they'd heard the noises too. The lobby was empty when I got there, the desk unattended. I waited, looking around, but no one showed up. I called out, my voice echoing through the empty space, but there was no response. I was about to turn back when I noticed something strange on the counter. A book lying open with a layout of the hotel. Curious, I stepped closer, studying the map. It showed the layout of each floor, each room numbered and labeled. But as I looked closer, I realized something strange. There was no room 215 on the map. My room didn't exist. I felt a chill run down my spine, my mind racing. I double-checked the map, trying to make sense of it, but there was no mistake. According to the layout, there was no room where I'd been staying. I backed away from the desk, feeling like the ground was shifting beneath me. I didn't understand what was happening, didn't know if I was dreaming or if I'd somehow stumbled into something I couldn't explain. I turned and headed back to the stairs, my mind spinning, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. When I reached the second floor, I paused, staring down the hallway. It looked different somehow, darker, like the walls were closing in. I walked slowly, counting the doors as I went. 207, 213, 217. There was no 215, just a blank stretch of wall where my room should have been. I stood there, my heart pounding, trying to wrap my mind around what I was seeing. I reached out, touching the wall, feeling the cold, solid surface beneath my fingers. Then from somewhere behind me, I heard a faint whisper. I turned, my heart racing, but there was no one there. I stumbled back, my mind reeling, and ran down the hall, down the stairs, out into the night. I didn't stop until I reached my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled for my keys. I drove away from that hotel, not looking back, my mind a blur of fear and confusion. I don't know what happened that night. Don't know if I imagined it or if I somehow slipped into a place that shouldn't exist. But one thing is certain, I'll never go back to Iron Falls. It was a Thursday night and I was finally back home after a long day at work. I'd just moved to this small town called Red Hill in Oregon, a quiet, out-of-the-way place that was supposed to be peaceful, a break from the noise of the city. I'd bought a house here, a small 2-story place on the edge of town with no neighbors in sight, just rows of trees and an open field in the back. When I walked into the house that night, everything was exactly how I'd left it. Quiet, a little too quiet, but I didn't mind. I kicked off my shoes, dropped my bag by the door, and headed to the kitchen to grab something to eat. I was exhausted, ready to just crash in bed. But as I stood in the kitchen rummaging through the fridge, I had this weird feeling like something wasn't quite right. I shrugged it off, blaming it on being overtired. I made a quick sandwich, grabbed a drink, and sat down at the kitchen table. As I ate, the silence started to get to me. The kind of silence that presses in on you, makes every little sound seem louder. I could hear the hum of the fridge, the ticking of the clock on the wall, and then footsteps. I froze, listening. They were faint, almost like an echo, but definitely footsteps, coming from upstairs. My first thought was that I'd left a window open, and the wind was moving something around. I got up, moving slowly, my heart starting to pound. I crept toward the staircase, straining to listen. The footsteps had stopped, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I took a deep breath, telling myself I was being ridiculous. The house was old. Old houses make noises. But as I stood there, staring up the stairs, I felt that chill again, that prickling on the back of my neck. I walked up, one step at a time, the stairs creaking under my weight. I kept my eyes fixed on the hallway ahead, half expecting to see someone standing there. But there was nothing, just the empty hall, lined with shadows from the dim light overhead. I checked each room one by one. The bathroom, the spare room, and finally, my bedroom. Everything was empty, exactly as I'd left it. The windows were all shut, and the doors locked. I let out a shaky breath, feeling a bit foolish. I was letting the quiet get to me. I went back downstairs, turned on the TV to fill the silence, and tried to shake off the lingering unease. I was just being paranoid, I told myself. It was a new place, and I wasn't used to the quiet yet. Eventually, I headed to bed, trying to ignore the creeping feeling that something was wrong. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to every little creak and groan of the house until I finally drifted off. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. At first, I wasn't sure what had woken me. The room was dark, and everything was silent. I lay there trying to go back to sleep, but then I heard it, the faint sound of footsteps again. This time they were closer, just outside my bedroom door. My heart started to race, and I sat up listening, holding my breath. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, like someone was pacing back and forth. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, my hands shaking, and turned on the flashlight. I got out of bed, moving as quietly as I could, and crept toward the door. I held the light up, pointing it at the floor, and slowly opened the door inch by inch. The hallway was empty. I shined the light around, but there was nothing, no sign of anyone. I took a few steps out, my eyes scanning the shadows, every nerve in my body on edge. I checked the other rooms again, making sure no one was there, but everything was still. Just the empty house, silent as ever. I went back to bed, my mind racing, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But sleep didn't come easy. I lay there for hours, listening, waiting, every little sound making my heart race. The next day I tried to brush it off. I went to work, telling myself I was being silly, that it was just nerves. But when I got home that night, the feeling was back. That same unease, like I was being watched. I went through my usual routine, trying to ignore it. But every time I passed a window, I felt like someone was outside, looking in. I'd glance out, but there was nothing there, just the empty yard, the dark line of trees at the edge of the field. But that night, as I was getting ready for bed, I caught something out of the corner of my eye. A shadow, just outside the window. I turned, my heart pounding, and saw him. A man standing in the yard, just beyond the reach of the porch light. He was tall, with dark hair and a blank expression, staring up at the window straight at me. I froze, my mind racing. I thought about calling the police, but I didn't want to take my eyes off him. I watched, waiting for him to move, but he just stood there staring. He didn't say anything, didn't make a sound. I took a step back, my hand fumbling for my phone, but when I looked back, he was gone. The yard was empty, just the faint shadows from the trees swaying in the wind. I called the police, told them what had happened. They came out, searched the property, but didn't find anything. No footprints, no sign that anyone had been there. They told me it was probably just a prank, maybe a kid from town messing around. But I knew what I'd seen. I knew he'd been there, watching me. The next few days were tense. I'd come home from work, expecting to see him, but the yard was always empty. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was out there, just beyond the trees, watching. One night I was in the living room watching TV when I heard it again. The footsteps, this time louder, more insistent. They echoed through the house, coming from upstairs. I grabbed a flashlight, my heart pounding, and crept up the stairs, every step slow and cautious. When I reached the top, I shined the light down the hall, but there was nothing, just the empty rooms. But then I heard it, a faint tapping coming from my bedroom window. I turned, feeling a chill run down my spine, and slowly walked down the hall. The tapping continued, soft but steady, like someone was trying to get my attention. When I reached the bedroom, I took a deep breath and pulled the curtain aside. He was there, standing right outside the window, his face inches from the glass. His eyes were wide, unblinking, staring straight at me. I stumbled back, my heart racing, my mind scrambling to make sense of what I was seeing. He didn't move, didn't react, just kept staring, his face pale and expressionless. I ran out of the room, down the stairs, and out the front door. I didn't stop until I was in my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. I started the engine, not caring where I was going, just needing to get away. I drove to a nearby motel, checked in, and spent the night staring at the ceiling, every sound making me jump. I didn't go back to the house for days, too scared to face whatever was waiting for me there. When I finally returned, the house was empty, just as I'd left it. But the feeling was still there, that sense of being watched, of something lurking just outside the windows. I don't know who he was, don't know what he wanted. But every night I close the curtains, double-check the locks, and wait, knowing that one day he'll come back. Moving to Arkville, New York was supposed to be a fresh start. I'd been tired of city life, the constant noise, and the feeling of being packed in like sardines. The house I found was a small place, sitting on the edge of town, near the woods. I liked the idea of being close to nature, having some peace and quiet. At first, everything was great. I'd wake up to birds chirping, and my mornings started with the sound of leaves rustling in the wind instead of honking horns. I started to feel at home, getting used to the silence, the isolation. But after a couple of weeks, that peace started to crack. It started one night after I'd been out late, catching up with an old friend. When I got home, the house felt different. I shrugged it off, blaming it on the late hour, and went inside. I locked the door, turned off the lights, and headed to bed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The house was dead silent, almost too quiet. I tried to go to sleep, telling myself I was just imagining things, but I kept waking up, staring into the darkness, listening. Around 2 a.m., I heard a faint sound, a scraping coming from outside. I lay there, listening, my pulse quickening. I got out of bed, moved to the window, and peered out. The yard was empty and the woods were still, just a wall of blackness against the night. The scraping stopped, and I tried to tell myself it was just a branch against the side of the house, or maybe an animal moving around outside. I went back to bed, pulling the covers up to my chin, and eventually, I fell asleep. The next morning, everything seemed normal. I went outside, checked around the house, but didn't see anything unusual. No branches against the walls, no signs of animals. I shook it off, telling myself I'd just been overreacting, and went on with my day. But that night it happened again. This time I heard it earlier, around midnight. The same faint scraping, like something was dragging along the outside wall. I sat up in bed, every muscle tense, listening. I told myself to ignore it, to just go to sleep. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, just beyond the walls. I got out of bed, creeping to the window again, and looked out. The yard was empty, but my eyes were drawn to the edge of the woods. Just beyond the tree line, half hidden in the shadows, was a figure. I squinted, trying to make out any details, but it was too dark. The figure was just standing there, perfectly still, watching the house. I felt a chill run down my spine, and I backed away from the window, my heart pounding. I went to the kitchen, grabbed my flashlight, and walked back to the window. I took a deep breath, turned on the light, and pointed it toward the woods. The figure was gone. I scanned the tree line, my pulse racing, but there was nothing there, just the empty darkness. I told myself I'd imagined it, that my mind was playing tricks on me. I turned off the flashlight, went back to bed, and eventually drifted off, though it took a long time. The next few days were quiet, and I started to feel like I'd overreacted. Maybe it had been a deer or a shadow from a tree. I tried to let it go, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Then a week later, it happened again. This time I was wide awake, sitting in the living room reading a book. It was around 11 p.m., and everything was silent, just the way I liked it. But then, out of nowhere, I heard the same scraping sound coming from the side of the house. I froze, my heart pounding, and listened. The scraping was slow, methodical, like someone dragging something along the wall. I stood up, moving to the window, and looked out. The figure was back, standing just at the edge of the woods, watching the house. I felt a surge of fear, my mind racing. I didn't know what to do, didn't know if I should go outside or call someone, but something in me told me to stay put, to stay behind the walls where it couldn't reach me. I backed away from the window, my hands shaking, and grabbed my phone. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? That there was someone standing in my yard watching me. They'd think I was crazy. I decided to wait it out, hoping the figure would go away. I turned off the lights, moved to the back of the house, and sat there in the dark, listening. After a while, the scraping stopped, and the house fell silent again. The next morning I went outside, determined to find some sign that I wasn't losing my mind. I walked around the side of the house, scanning the ground, looking for footprints, anything. And that's when I saw it. Right at the edge of the woods in the dirt was a single, deep footprint. It was too big to be mine, and the shape was strange, almost like it had been pressed into the ground with a heavy weight. I felt a chill run down my spine, and I backed away, my mind racing. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, maybe just an animal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, something that wasn't supposed to be. That night I locked every door, every window, double-checking each one before I went to bed. But I couldn't sleep. Every little sound made me jump. Every creak in the floorboard sent my heart racing. Around 3 a.m., I heard it again. The scraping, louder this time, coming from the back of the house. I lay there, frozen, listening, my mind racing. I didn't want to look, didn't want to see whatever was out there, but I couldn't ignore it. I got out of bed, grabbed my flashlight, and moved to the back door. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and shined the light outside. The figure was standing in my backyard, closer now, halfway between the house and the woods. I felt a surge of panic, my mind scrambling to make sense of what I was seeing. The figure was tall, its body thin and shadowy, almost blending into the darkness. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there, watching me. I backed away, my hands shaking, and locked the door, turning off the light. I sat down on the floor, my back against the wall, trying to calm myself, trying to tell myself it was just a trick of the light. But I knew, deep down, that it wasn't. The next morning, I decided I couldn't stay in the house anymore. I packed a bag, called a friend, and left, not looking back. I told myself I'd come back in a few days once I'd cleared my head, but part of me knew I wouldn't. I still don't know who or what that figure was or why it was watching me. But every time I close my eyes, I see it, standing at the edge of the woods, waiting. And I know, deep down, that it's still out there, watching, waiting for me to come back. It was a Friday night, and I was driving back from a late work meeting in a small town about 2 hours outside of Houston, Texas. The meeting had run longer than expected, and by the time I got on the road, it was almost midnight. I was exhausted, barely keeping my eyes open, but all I wanted was to get home, crawl into bed, and sleep until noon. The highway was practically deserted. Just me, my car, and miles of dark, empty road stretching out in front of me. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the yellow lines on the road and the occasional sign. The radio was on, just loud enough to keep me company, but it was mostly static out here in the middle of nowhere. I'd been driving for about an hour when I noticed a car coming up behind me. Its headlights were bright, cutting through the night, and at first, I figured it was just another late-night traveler, someone heading home after a long day. But as the car got closer, it didn't pass. Instead, it stayed right on my bumper, its headlights blinding me in my rearview mirror. I tried speeding up, hoping they'd pass, but the car matched my speed, staying just a few feet behind me. My irritation started to grow. I tapped my brakes lightly, a signal for them to back off, but they didn't budge. I couldn't see the driver through the glare of the headlights, just the shape of the car, a dark, nondescript sedan. I took a deep breath, telling myself to stay calm. Maybe they were just tired, maybe they didn't realize how close they were. I drove for a few more miles, hoping they'd back off or pass, but they stayed right behind me, relentless. The longer they stayed there, the more my frustration turned into unease. The road was empty, no other cars in sight, no exits for miles. Just me, this stranger, and the endless stretch of highway. Finally, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. There was a small rest stop coming up on the right, just a pull-off with a few picnic tables and a bathroom. I figured I'd pull over, let them pass, and wait a few minutes before getting back on the road. I put on my blinker, slowing down as I approached the rest stop. But instead of passing, the car slowed down too, still staying right behind me. I felt a prickle of fear, my heart starting to race. Why weren't they passing? I pulled into the rest stop, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, and parked near the picnic tables. I waited, watching the road, expecting the car to drive by. But they didn't. Instead, they pulled in right behind me, parking a few spaces away. I glanced over, trying to see the driver, but the windows were tinted dark, making it impossible to see inside. The engine was still running, headlights still on, casting long shadows across the empty rest stop. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. I didn't know what they wanted, didn't understand why they were following me, but I told myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe they were lost. Maybe they needed a break too. I looked down at my phone, considering calling someone, but I didn't want to overreact. I checked the time, 12:45 a.m. All I had to do was wait it out, stay in the car, and wait for them to leave. But after a few minutes, the driver's side door opened. A man stepped out, tall, dressed in dark clothes, his face hidden in the shadows. He stood there, facing my car, not moving, just watching. I felt a surge of panic, my hands trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. I didn't know what to do, didn't know if I should stay put or try to drive off. But something about the way he was standing there, so still, so silent, made me feel trapped. Then he started walking toward my car, slow, deliberate steps that echoed in the empty rest stop. I could barely breathe, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I locked my doors, my fingers fumbling with the button, and glanced around, looking for an escape. But there was nowhere to go, no one else around, just me, my car, and this stranger getting closer with every step. He reached my window, stopping just inches away, and leaned down, his face hidden in the shadows. I couldn't see his eyes, couldn't see his expression, but I could feel his gaze, cold and unsettling. I rolled the window down just a crack, my voice shaking. "Can I help you?" He didn't answer, just stood there breathing, the sound faint but steady. I swallowed, trying to keep my voice steady, trying to sound calm. "Do you need something?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. He leaned closer, his face almost pressed against the glass, and for the first time, I saw his eyes. They were empty, cold, like there was nothing behind them, just a void. "I need a ride," he said, his voice flat, emotionless. I felt a chill run down my spine. "I'm sorry," I stammered. I can't help you." He didn't move, didn't react, just stared at me with those empty eyes. I could feel the fear building, a cold knot in my stomach, but I didn't know what to do. I wanted to run, wanted to get as far away from him as possible, but I felt paralyzed, trapped by his gaze. "Please," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need a ride." I shook my head, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I'm sorry, I have to go." I turned the key, the engine sputtering to life, and threw the car into reverse, pulling away from him as fast as I could. I glanced in the rearview mirror, watching as he stood there motionless, watching me drive away. I got back on the highway, my heart racing, my mind spinning. I didn't know what had just happened, didn't understand why he'd been following me, but I knew I had to get as far away from that rest stop as possible. For the next few miles, I kept glancing in the mirror, half expecting to see him behind me. But the road was empty, just the endless stretch of darkness. After a while, I started to calm down, telling myself it was over, that he was gone. But then, out of nowhere, a pair of headlights appeared in my mirror. Far back but moving fast, getting closer with every second. I felt a surge of fear, my hands shaking as I gripped the wheel. I sped up, hoping to put some distance between us, but the car kept coming, gaining on me, relentless. Within minutes, it was right behind me, the headlights blinding in my mirror, filling the car with harsh white light. I couldn't see the driver, couldn't tell if it was him, but I knew deep down that it was. I hit the gas, speeding down the highway, my heart racing, my mind screaming at me to get away. But no matter how fast I went, the car stayed right behind me, matching my speed, like a shadow I couldn't escape. I thought about pulling over, about trying to lose him, but every time I glanced in the mirror, those headlights were there, a constant reminder that he was still following me. Finally, I saw an exit coming up, a small road leading off the highway, and I took it, hoping to lose him in the turns. I sped down the road, my tires screeching, my heart pounding, but when I glanced in the mirror, the headlights were gone. I pulled over, breathing hard, my hands shaking, and sat there in the dark, trying to calm myself. The road was empty, silent, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of relief. But then, in the silence, I heard it, a faint knock coming from the back seat. I froze, my heart pounding, my mind racing. I didn't want to look, didn't want to see, but I couldn't stop myself. I turned, glancing over my shoulder, and saw him, sitting in the back seat, his eyes empty, his face inches from mine. "I told you," he whispered, his voice cold and hollow. "I need a ride." I'd just moved to Davenport, Iowa. It wasn't the biggest city, but it was a decent place to settle down and focus on work. The house I'd bought was an old two-story place, a bit run down but solid, with creaky floors and a lot of character. It had a basement, which was unusual for me, but I figured I'd use it for storage or maybe turn it into a workshop at some point. For the first few weeks, everything was normal. I spent my time getting settled, unpacking boxes, setting up the furniture. I didn't go down to the basement often, just once to throw a few boxes down there that I didn't feel like unpacking right away. The basement had a damp, musty smell like it hadn't been used in years, but I figured that was just part of the charm of an old house. Then, one night I heard it. I was lying in bed, just about to drift off, when I heard a faint noise coming from below. It sounded like a scraping, almost like something being dragged across the floor. I sat up, my heart pounding, listening. The sound stopped, and for a moment everything was silent. I tried to convince myself it was just the house settling, just old pipes making noise. But then, there it was again, a soft, deliberate scraping coming from the basement. I got out of bed, my skin prickling with unease, and crept down the stairs. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from a dim bulb in the kitchen. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, and opened the door to the basement. The smell of dampness hit me, stronger than before, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I fumbled for the light switch, flicking it on, and a single weak bulb illuminated the top of the stairs. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely more than a whisper. Silence. I stood there, my heart racing, listening. But there was nothing, just the quiet hum of the house around me. I told myself I was being ridiculous, just letting my imagination get the better of me. I closed the door and went back upstairs, trying to shake off the lingering feeling of unease. The next night it happened again. I was in the living room this time watching TV when I heard it. A soft, steady scraping coming from below. I muted the TV, straining to listen, and felt my heart skip a beat. It was the same sound, that same deliberate scraping, like something or someone was moving around in the basement. I stood up, my body tense, and moved toward the basement door. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob, every instinct telling me to leave it alone. But I couldn't ignore it, couldn't just pretend it wasn't happening. I opened the door, the smell of dampness hitting me again. stronger this time, almost overpowering. I flicked on the light and stared down the stairs, the faint glow barely reaching the bottom. "Is someone down there?" I called out, my voice shaky. Nothing. Just silence. I took a deep breath and started down the stairs, one step at a time, each creak echoing in the stillness. When I reached the bottom, I looked around, the dim light casting long shadows across the walls. The basement was empty, just the boxes I'd thrown down here and a few old pieces of furniture left by the previous owner. But as I stood there, looking around, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The air was thick, heavy, and I could feel something, like a presence lingering in the shadows. I backed up the stairs, my pulse racing, and closed the door, locking it behind me. I didn't know what I was feeling, didn't know if I was just scaring myself, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in that house. The next few nights, the sounds got louder. It wasn't just scraping anymore. Sometimes I'd hear footsteps, slow and heavy, pacing back and forth in the basement. Other times, I'd hear faint whispers, too soft to make out the words, but close enough that I could feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I started sleeping with the lights on, every door locked, every window bolted shut. But it didn't matter. Every night, I'd hear the sounds, the scraping, the footsteps, the whispers, and every night, I'd lie in bed, my heart pounding, too scared to move. One night I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I was exhausted, barely sleeping, and the fear was eating away at me. I had to know what was down there, had to know if it was just my imagination or if there was really something or someone in my basement. I grabbed a flashlight, my hands shaking, and made my way to the basement door. I stood there, staring at it, my heart pounding, and took a deep breath. I unlocked the door, pushed it open, and shined the flashlight down the stairs. The basement was dark, the single bulb barely illuminating the bottom of the stairs. I stepped down, the wooden steps creaking under my weight, and held the flashlight up, scanning the room. Everything was as I'd left it. The boxes, the old furniture, the empty walls. But then I noticed something strange. In the corner of the room, near the back wall, there was a small dark spot on the floor, almost like a stain. I walked over, my heart pounding, and shined the light on it. The stain was dark, sticky, and fresh, like it had been left there recently. I knelt down, reaching out to touch it, and felt a cold chill run through me. It was blood. I stumbled back, my mind racing, and looked around the basement, shining the light into every corner, every shadow. But there was nothing, no one. I backed up the stairs, my hands shaking, and slammed the door shut, locking it. I didn't know what was going on, didn't know if I was losing my mind or if there was something or someone down there. But I knew I couldn't stay in that house. I grabbed my keys, my phone, and ran out the door, not looking back. I drove to a friend's house, too scared to stay alone, and told them everything. They looked at me like I was crazy, but I didn't care. I knew what I'd heard, knew what I'd seen. The next day I went back with a friend, determined to figure out what was going on. We searched the basement, looking for any sign of who or what had been down there. But the bloodstain was gone, the floor clean, like it had never been there. I moved out a few weeks later, unable to shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in that house. I don't know what I heard, don't know if it was real or just my mind playing tricks on me. But every time I think about that basement, I feel a chill, a reminder of the presence that lingered in the shadows. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear it, the faint sound of footsteps, the soft scrape of something moving in the darkness, a whisper too faint to understand but close enough to make my skin crawl. It was the dead of night, and I was driving through Buckley, Washington, a small town on the edge of the woods, nestled at the foot of the mountains. I'd been visiting a friend who lived a couple of towns over, and the visit had run late. I wanted to get home, to crawl into my own bed, but the rain had picked up, turning the road slick and hard to see. The highway was empty, just a dark, wet ribbon stretching out before me, lined with thick pines. My wipers were going full speed, but even then visibility was bad. I kept my hands tight on the wheel, squinting at the road, watching the dashed lines flash past. Then, just as I rounded a bend, my headlights caught something on the side of the road. A figure. I hit the brakes out of reflex, my heart jumping into my throat as my car slid to a stop. I squinted, peering through the rain, and there he was. A man was standing just off the shoulder, right at the edge of the forest, his clothes soaked, his face hidden in the shadows. He wasn't waving, wasn't trying to flag me down. He just stood there staring, still as a statue. I hesitated, my fingers drumming on the steering wheel. Everything in me was telling me to drive on, to ignore him. But something about the way he was standing there, so alone in the rain, made me feel guilty. What if he was stranded? What if he needed help? I rolled down the window a crack, enough to call out, but keeping a barrier between us. "Hey, you okay?" He didn't answer, didn't move, just kept staring. I could barely see his face through the downpour, but there was something unsettling about the way he was watching me. His eyes, though barely visible, felt locked on me, intense. I felt a chill, despite the warmth of the car. I didn't want to open the door, didn't want to get out, but the guilt gnawed at me. What if he was hurt? "Do you need a ride?" I asked louder this time, trying to keep my voice steady. He took a step forward, slow and deliberate, his shoes splashing in the puddles. I tightened my grip on the wheel, my heart pounding. He was close enough now that I could see his face, a pale, gaunt face, expressionless, with hollow eyes that seemed to look straight through me. "Please," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I just need to get to town." Something about his tone sent a shiver down my spine, but I pushed the feeling down. I'd feel like a jerk if I left him out there, alone in the rain. "All right," I said, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. "Get in." He opened the passenger door and climbed in, bringing the rain and cold with him. I could smell the dampness, mixed with a faint, sour odor that made my stomach twist. He closed the door, settling into the seat, his gaze fixed straight ahead. I glanced at him, my unease growing. Up close, he looked even stranger, pale like he hadn't seen the sun in months, with dark circles under his eyes. His clothes were soaked, sticking to his thin frame, and his hands were clenched tight in his lap, knuckles white. Where are you headed?" I asked, trying to keep things casual. "Just keep driving," he said, his voice flat, almost robotic. I gripped the wheel, forcing myself to stay calm. I didn't know what I'd gotten myself into, but I didn't want to make him angry. I pressed down on the gas, guiding the car back onto the road, the rain pounding against the roof like a relentless drumbeat. The silence between us was thick, oppressive. I could feel him watching me, his gaze like a weight pressing down on me. I tried to focus on the road, to ignore the way my heart was racing, but the tension was unbearable. After a few minutes, I couldn't take it anymore. I cleared my throat, forcing myself to speak. Were you broken down or something?" He didn't answer right away, just kept staring out the windshield, his face expressionless. Finally, he turned to me, his eyes cold and empty. "I was waiting," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "Waiting for what?" "For you." I swallowed, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly they hurt. I didn't know what he meant, didn't want to know, but I forced myself to keep driving, to keep my eyes on the road. The rain was coming down harder now, the wipers barely keeping up, and the road was a blur of wet pavement and shadows. I stole a glance at him, my heart pounding, but he was still staring straight ahead, his face blank, unreadable. I didn't know what to do, didn't know if I should stop, but something about him kept me frozen, like I couldn't turn away, couldn't break the silence. Then, suddenly he spoke again, his voice low and steady. "You should have left me there." My throat went dry. What are you talking about?" He turned to me, his eyes boring into mine. "You should have driven past. You shouldn't have stopped." I felt a wave of panic, my mind racing. I didn't understand what he was saying, Didn't know what he wanted, but I knew I had to get him out of the car. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. Look, maybe I should just let you off here. Before I could finish, his hand shot out, grabbing my arm in a grip so tight it felt like a vice. His skin was cold, clammy, his fingers digging into my flesh. No, he said, his voice hard, unyielding. You can't leave now. I froze, my heart pounding, the fear clawing at my throat. I didn't know what to do, didn't know how to get away from him. His grip was like iron, and his eyes were filled with something dark, something that made my blood run cold. Let me go, I stammered, my voice shaking. He didn't move, didn't let go, just kept staring at me, his face inches from mine. I could feel his breath, cold and stale, and the smell of dampness filled the car, thick and suffocating. You're going to take me where I need to go, he said, his voice low, menacing. And then you can leave. I nodded, my mind racing, desperate to get him out of the car, to get away from him. I didn't know what he wanted, didn't know what he was capable of, but I knew I had to stay calm, had to keep him calm. All right, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I'll take you where you need to go. He released my arm, leaning back in his seat, his gaze never leaving me. I felt the weight of his stare heavy and suffocating, but I forced myself to keep driving, my mind racing. The road stretched out before us, dark and endless, and the rain pounded against the roof like a relentless drumbeat. I could feel my pulse racing, my hands shaking, but I kept my eyes on the road, forcing myself to stay calm. After what felt like an eternity, he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. Stop here. I glanced around, but there was nothing, just trees and shadows stretching out into the darkness. Are you sure? I asked, my voice shaking. He nodded, his gaze fixed on something in the distance, something I couldn't see. I pulled the car over, my hands trembling, and he reached for the door, his movements slow and deliberate. He climbed out, his figure barely visible in the rain, and stood there, staring into the darkness. I watched him, my heart pounding, waiting for him to leave, to disappear into the night. But he didn't move, didn't turn away. He just stood there, staring at me, his face hidden in the shadows. I didn't wait. I slammed the door, hit the gas, and sped off, my heart racing, my mind reeling. I didn't look back, didn't want to see him standing there watching me. But as I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still there, still watching, his gaze like a weight pressing down on me. And every time I close my eyes, I see him, standing at the edge of the road, waiting for me to stop again. I had just moved into my new apartment in Carbondale, Illinois. It wasn't much, but it was mine, a small one-bedroom place on the third floor of an old building downtown. The rent was cheap, and I didn't mind the creaky floors or the occasional flickering light. It was quiet, and after the chaos of moving, I was looking forward to a little peace. The first couple of nights were uneventful. I'd unpacked most of my boxes, set up my bed, and was getting used to the quirks of the place. The way the pipes rattled when the water ran, the slight draft near the window. It was late autumn, and the nights were getting cold, but I liked it. There was something cozy about it, being high up, away from the noise of the street. Then, on my third night there, something strange happened. I was lying in bed, just about to drift off, when I heard it, a soft tapping at my window. I opened my eyes, frowning. It was faint, but steady, like someone was lightly tapping their knuckles against the glass. I sat up, my heart starting to race. My bed was positioned so I couldn't see the window from where I was lying, but I could see the shadows moving slightly across the ceiling as the light from the street outside filtered in. I told myself it was probably nothing, maybe a branch from a nearby tree, or maybe even just the wind. But the tapping continued, rhythmic, almost insistent. I got out of bed, creeping toward the window, my hands sweaty, my pulse racing. When I reached the window, I took a deep breath and peeked out. Nothing. Just the empty street below, the faint glow of streetlights, and the shadow of a few parked cars. I let out a shaky breath, feeling a little silly for getting so worked up. I closed the curtains tightly, went back to bed, and eventually drifted off. The next night it happened again. This time I was in the living room watching TV when I heard the tapping. It was soft, barely noticeable, but once I heard it, I couldn't ignore it. My body tensed and I turned off the TV, sitting in silence, listening. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the window in the living room this time, the one overlooking the alleyway behind the building. I got up slowly, moving toward the window, every nerve in my body on edge. When I reached it, I pulled the curtain back just a little, just enough to see. The alleyway was empty, the shadows deep, but nothing out of the ordinary. I tried to tell myself it was just a noise from the building, maybe something shifting in the walls. But as I stood there staring into the darkness, I felt a chill run down my spine. I closed the curtain and went back to the couch, trying to ignore the unease that was settling over me. But the tapping didn't stop. It went on for another few minutes, steady and relentless, before finally fading into silence. I didn't sleep well that night, every little creak and groan of the building making my heart race. The next day, I tried to put it out of my mind. I went to work, stayed late, trying to convince myself that I was overreacting. But when I got home that night, the apartment felt different. The air was heavy, thick with something I couldn't quite place. I double-checked the locks on the doors and windows, telling myself it was just my imagination, just a new place taking some time to get used to. But as the night wore on, the feeling only grew stronger. Around midnight, just as I was getting ready for bed, I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. This time it was louder, more insistent, coming from the window in my bedroom. I froze, my heart pounding, staring at the closed curtains. The tapping continued, steady, almost like a knock, like someone, or something, was trying to get my attention. I moved slowly toward the window, my hands shaking. When I reached it, I took a deep breath, bracing myself, and pulled the curtain back. There, staring in at me, was a face. I jumped back, a strangled yell escaping my throat. The face was pale, almost ghostly, with wide, unblinking eyes that seemed to bore into me. It was pressed right up against the glass, the mouth twisted into a strange, eerie smile. I stumbled back, my heart racing, barely able to breathe. The face didn't move, didn't blink, just kept staring, watching me with that unsettling smile. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen, unable to move. Eventually, I forced myself to look away, my mind racing. I didn't know what to do, didn't know if I should call someone. But when I looked back, the face was gone. The window was empty, just my own pale reflection staring back at me. I closed the curtains, my hands shaking, and backed away from the window, my mind struggling to make sense of what I'd just seen. I told myself it was a trick of the light, maybe a shadow from outside, but deep down I knew it wasn't. I'd seen it clear as day. That night I barely slept, lying in bed with every light in the apartment on, listening to every creak and groan. I kept glancing at the window, half expecting to see that face staring back at me. The next morning I called the building manager, told him about what I'd seen. He looked at me like I was crazy, but he promised to check it out, to see if anyone had been hanging around the building. A few days passed and things seemed to go back to normal. I didn't hear the tapping again, didn't see any faces at the window. I started to relax, convincing myself that it had all been in my head, just a combination of nerves and lack of sleep. But then, one night, just as I was falling asleep, I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. I sat up, my heart pounding, staring at the window. The curtains were closed, but I could feel it. Someone was out there, watching, waiting. I got out of bed slowly, my body tense, and moved toward the window. My hands were shaking as I reached for the curtain, but I forced myself to pull it back. Nothing. Just the empty street below, the quiet darkness. I let out a shaky breath, relief flooding through me. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A faint outline, barely visible, moving away from the window. It was gone before I could react, disappearing into the shadows below. I closed the curtain, my heart racing, and backed away, every instinct telling me to get out, to leave the apartment. I grabbed my phone, dialed the building manager's number, but it went straight to voicemail. I spent the night on the couch, every light in the apartment on, my eyes fixed on the window. I didn't sleep, didn't even close my eyes. Just sat there, waiting, listening. When morning finally came, I packed a bag and left. I didn't care about the lease, didn't care about the deposit. I just wanted out. It's been a few months now, and I still don't know what I saw, still don't understand what was happening in that apartment. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone, I hear it. The faint sound of tapping coming from somewhere outside, like someone or something is still out there, still waiting, just outside the window. I was driving home from work on a Friday night, tired and eager to get back to my apartment in Denver. The freeway was unusually empty, just me and the steady hum of the engine. It was around midnight, and the darkness felt oppressive, pressing in from all sides. The neon signs of the few open gas stations flickered intermittently, casting long, eerie shadows across the road. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. It was 12:15 a.m. The streets were deserted, the usual city noise replaced by the distant sound of a dog barking and the occasional rustle of leaves. My thoughts wandered to the weekend ahead, plans with friends, and the relief of finally getting some rest. Fatigue was setting in, and my eyelids felt heavy. As I merged onto Highway 70, the road stretched out before me like a black ribbon cutting through the night. The headlights illuminated nothing but empty lanes and the occasional passing car, but they moved too quickly for me to get a good look. The landscape was monotonous, bare trees, flat land, and the endless stretch of asphalt. About 15 miles into the drive, I saw a figure standing on the roadside. At first, I thought it might be someone needing help, maybe a stranded motorist. The figure was dressed in an old, worn-out coat, holding something in their hand that looked like a flashlight. I slowed down, my heart rate picking up a bit. It was late, and seeing someone alone at this hour was unusual. I pulled over to the shoulder, the engine idling softly. The road behind me was dark, the only light coming from my headlights and the occasional street lamp in the distance. I rolled down my window and called out, "Hey, do you need a ride?" The figure stood still for a moment, then began walking toward my car. I could see their face partially in shadow, but something about their demeanor was off. They weren't in a hurry, just moving at a steady pace. As they approached, I noticed their hands were shaking slightly, and their eyes darted around nervously. "Yeah, I could use a ride," they said, their voice low and raspy. There was an accent I couldn't place, something Eastern European maybe. I hesitated, but it was late, and it felt safer to have someone in the car than to drive alone. "Sure, hop in," I replied, unlocking the door. The passenger climbed in quickly, settling in the back seat. They didn't say much, just nodded a few times as I put the car back in gear. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Their eyes were fixed on the road ahead, staring straight through me. We drove in silence for a while, the only sound the engine and the occasional crunch of gravel as we passed over small hills. I tried to make conversation, asking if they were headed in the same direction, but they remained quiet, only responding with short answers. After about 10 minutes, I decided to ask again. "So, where are you headed?" They finally spoke, their voice barely above a whisper. "I'm trying to get home. Took a wrong turn." I nodded, understanding that people get lost sometimes. "Which way did you come from?" They pointed to the left, but I couldn't make out much in the dim light. "I was coming from Elm Street, but I'm not sure where to go from here." I glanced at the map on my phone, trying to figure out our location. Elm Street was a few miles back, near the old mill. "There's a gas station a few miles ahead. We can stop there if you need." They nodded again, but their expression remained tense. I kept driving, the miles passing by slowly. The road seemed to go on forever, and the darkness outside felt thicker with each passing mile. About 20 minutes into the drive, I noticed something strange in the rearview mirror. The reflection showed a shadow moving alongside the car, but when I turned my head, there was nothing there. My heart skipped a beat and I glanced back, but the lane beside us was empty. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. The passenger remained silent, staring straight ahead. I tried to focus on the road, but my mind was racing. Was that shadow still there? I turned the mirror again, but no one was visible. The feeling of being watched settled over me, making me uneasy. We approached a bend in the road, the headlights cutting through the darkness but revealing very little. As we rounded the curve, I saw the outline of a dilapidated farmhouse on the side of the road. It looked abandoned, windows boarded up, and the porch sagging. The sight sent a chill down my spine. "That's the old Miller place," I said, trying to sound casual. "Been abandoned for years." The passenger nodded, finally breaking the silence. "It's spooky out here at night." I laughed nervously. "Yeah, it can get pretty creepy." We drove past the farmhouse, but something felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, and I glanced again at the passenger, but they were still staring straight ahead. Suddenly, the car shuddered as we hit a pothole, and the engine made a strange noise. I pulled over to the side, turning off the engine. "All right, let me check under the hood," I said, getting out of the car. The passenger stayed in the seat, watching me intently. I grabbed my flashlight and walked around to the front of the car, inspecting the engine. Everything seemed fine, just a bit of dirt and grime from the road. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. "Nothing wrong here," I called back, getting back into the driver's seat. "It should be fine now." I restarted the car and it purred to life without any issues. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. "Let's keep going." We're almost to the gas station. As we drove on, the road seemed to narrow, the trees pressing in closer on either side. The lights from my headlights barely penetrated the thick darkness. I kept glancing at the passenger, who remained silent, their presence becoming more unsettling by the minute. After another 10 minutes, we finally saw the flickering lights of the gas station up ahead. Relief washed over me. "There it is. Let's stop there." I pulled into the parking lot, turning off the engine. "All right, we're here. You can get some gas or grab a snack if you want." The passenger nodded, reaching into their pocket. "Thank you." I unlocked the door for them, but before they could move, a sudden gust of wind blew through the parking lot, sending a chill down my spine. The temperature seemed to drop instantly, and I shivered despite the warmth inside the car. "Are you okay?" I asked, concerned. They nodded, but their hands were trembling. "Yeah, just a bit cold." I went to the gas pump, starting the process of refueling. As I filled the tank, I kept an eye on the passenger, who was still staring straight ahead. My mind was racing. This didn't feel right. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I finished refueling and returned to the car, trying to shake off the unease. The passenger was still silent, their eyes fixed on the road ahead. "All right, let's get going," I said, turning the key in the ignition. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I glanced at the passenger once more. They were now staring out the window, watching something I couldn't see. I felt a knot form in my stomach. "Is everything okay?" They turned to face me, and I saw their eyes, pale and hollow, almost empty. "I think you can go on without me," they said softly. I frowned, confused. "What do you mean? You need to get home." They shook their heads slowly, their expression distant. "No, you need to leave. Now." Before I could respond, a loud screeching sound echoed from the gas station. I turned around, seeing the front lights of the station flicker and dim. The once quiet parking lot was now eerily silent, except for the sound of the wind howling through the trees. "What's happening?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. The passenger didn't answer. Instead, they started to fade, becoming translucent as if they were a ghost. My eyes widened in disbelief. "Wait, what's going on?" I reached out instinctively, but my hand passed through the seat where they had been sitting moments before. "No, don't leave. Their form disappeared completely, leaving the car empty. I sat there for a moment, heart pounding, trying to process what I had just seen. Was I hallucinating? The stress of the long drive and late hour was getting to me. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. Okay, maybe it's just tiredness, I muttered to myself. I need to get home. I started the car and began to drive away from the gas station, the lights fading into the distance. The road felt different now, as if the atmosphere had shifted. The air was colder and an oppressive silence hung over everything. About 5 miles down the highway, I noticed a faint figure standing on the roadside again. My heart skipped a beat. Not again, I thought, gripping the steering wheel tighter. I slowed down, half expecting the figure to approach, but it remained still, just watching me. I pulled over once more, the engine idling as I rolled down the window cautiously. Hey, do you need another ride? Nothing happened. The figure didn't move, didn't respond. I felt a sense of dread creeping over me. Hello? I called out, my voice shaky. Suddenly, the figure began to move toward the car, walking at a slow, deliberate pace. I watched as they approached, their face still partially hidden in the shadows. Panic surged through me. I need to go, I said quickly, starting the car and pulling back onto the highway. As I sped away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The figure was still there, standing by the roadside, watching me. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Was this some kind of prank? A hallucination? Or something else entirely? I pressed harder on the accelerator, trying to put as much distance between us as possible. The car's interior felt cold, my breath visible in the dim light. The highway seemed to stretch endlessly, the darkness pressing in from all sides. A few miles later, I saw a police car on the side of the road, its lights flashing intermittently. Relief mixed with anxiety. Maybe I can ask for help, I thought, pulling over to the side. The police officer approached my car, flashlight in hand. Everything okay here? He asked. I nodded quickly, trying to steady my voice. Yeah, just needed a break. He glanced at me, then at the passenger seat. You got someone with you? Yeah, a hitchhiker, I replied, pointing to the empty seat. The officer's expression changed. You mean someone just vanished? I felt a chill run down my spine. What do you mean? He sighed, shaking his head. There's been reports of a phantom hitchhiker on this stretch of Highway 70. Folks say they've picked someone up and then the person disappears without a trace. Sometimes they see them again down the road. I stared at him, realization dawning. Is that? He nodded solemnly. Yeah, it's been happening for years. We don't know why. Best thing is to stay calm and keep driving. I'll leave you to it. He turned and walked back to his patrol car, leaving me alone on the dark highway. I sat there for a moment, processing what he said. My hands were shaking and my heart was racing. I started the car again, feeling a mix of fear and relief. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the image of the passenger fading away and the officer's words echoing in my mind. The road seemed even longer now, each mile dragging by painfully slow. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the phantom hitchhiker again. The rest of the drive was a blur. The city lights of Denver finally came into view, a beacon of safety in the darkness. I merged onto the main roads, the familiar streets a stark contrast to the eerie highway. The tension in my body began to ease as the distance from Highway 70 increased. I pulled into my apartment complex, the lights of the building welcoming me home. As I got out of the car, I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The night had been long, and the experience would stay with me for a while. I walked to my door, the sounds of the city night gradually filling my senses again. Inside my apartment, I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, trying to calm my racing heart. I kept replaying the night's events in my mind, the hitchhiker, their silent presence, the sudden disappearance, and the officer's explanation. It all felt so surreal, yet the fear was very real. I decided to check my phone for any messages, hoping to distract myself. There were a few notifications, nothing out of the ordinary. As I scrolled through, I found a message from a friend inviting me to a weekend trip. I quickly replied, assuring them I was free. Sitting down on the couch, I tried to relax, but sleep was elusive. The memory of the phantom hitchhiker kept replaying in my mind, making my skin crawl. I wondered about the stories I had heard about haunted highways and ghostly apparitions. Now, I had experienced it firsthand. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I decided to drive back down Highway 70 during the day, curious if the phantom would appear again. Maybe seeing it in daylight would explain some of the mystery. As I drove, the highway was busy with traffic, the sun shining brightly overhead. There was no sign of the hitchhiker, no lone figure waiting by the roadside. I felt a bit foolish for believing in ghost stories, but the fear lingered. About halfway through, I saw a car pull over and a man approached my vehicle. He looked familiar, like the hitchhiker from the night before. My heart skipped a beat. "Hey, do you need a ride?" I called out, remembering the previous night's encounter. The man smiled, though there was something unsettling about his expression. "Yeah, I could use a lift. Heading to Denver?" "Yeah, same as you," I replied, opening the passenger door. He climbed in, settling into the seat without a word. The drive continued smoothly, but I kept an eye on him in the rearview mirror. He stared straight ahead, just like the night before. After a few miles, I decided to ask, "Where are you from?" He looked at me briefly, then back to the road. "Just passing through." I glanced back, noticing his hands resting on his lap, completely still. "Need any help?" He shook his head slightly. "No thanks, I just need to get home." I felt a shiver run down my spine. "All right, let me know if you need anything." We drove in silence for a while, the atmosphere tense and heavy. I couldn't focus on the road, my mind racing with thoughts of déjà vu and the possibility of encountering the phantom again. Suddenly my phone rang, jolting me out of my thoughts. It was my friend from the weekend trip. "Hey man, are you still coming?" "Yeah, just on my way," I replied, trying to mask my unease. As I hung up, I glanced back at the passenger. His eyes met mine for a split second, and I saw a flicker of recognition. Or was it something else? My heart pounded in my chest. "Hey, are you okay?" I asked, trying to sound normal. He nodded, but his expression was blank. "I'm fine." I took a deep breath, deciding to drop the subject. "All right, let's keep driving." We continued on, the miles passing by without incident. Eventually, we reached the exit for the weekend trip. I turned to offer him the opportunity to exit as well. "Here we are. Let me know if you need anything else." He gave a small nod and unbuckled his seatbelt. "Thanks for the ride." As he stepped out of the car, I watched him for a moment, expecting something unusual, but he simply walked away without a word. I felt a mix of relief and lingering fear. "All right, I'm off," I said, pulling away from the exit. The rest of the drive went smoothly, the tension easing as I approached my destination. But the encounter left me shaken. The lines between reality and the supernatural blurred once more. Back in my apartment, I tried to process everything. The encounters on Highway 70 felt too similar to be mere coincidences. I decided to do some research, looking up local legends and news stories about the highway. I found several articles about the phantom hitchhiker, a tragic story from decades ago. A young woman named Emily Miller had been driving home one night when her car broke down near the old mill. She flagged down a passing driver, who offered her a ride. They never reached her destination. The car was found abandoned, but there was no sign of Emily. Since then, drivers have reported picking up a hitchhiker who disappears without a trace, leaving them questioning what they saw. The more I read, the more I realized the truth behind the stories. Emily's spirit seemed trapped on the highway, repeating her final moments over and over. It made sense of my experiences, the silent passenger, the sudden disappearances, and the chilling presence that lingered on the road. I decided to take action, wanting to help put Emily's spirit to rest. I reached out to a local historian who specialized in haunted locations. He agreed to meet with me, intrigued by my encounters. We met at a cafe near my apartment, discussing the legend in detail. If Emily's spirit is still present, there might be something we can do to help her move on, the historian suggested. Sometimes acknowledging their presence and addressing their unresolved issues can make a difference. Armed with this knowledge, I felt a sense of purpose. I decided to visit the old mill, the site of Emily's last known location. The area was now a deserted park, overgrown with weeds and surrounded by tall, imposing trees. The night was still, the only sounds the distant calls of nocturnal animals and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. I parked my car and walked toward the mill, flashlight in hand. The structure loomed ahead, its wooden frame weathered and decaying. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I might encounter. As I approached, I felt a presence, an intangible weight pressing down on me. The air grew colder, and my breath became visible in the dim light. I reached the base of the mill, the silence broken only by the occasional creak of the old building. "Emily," I called out softly, hoping to communicate with her spirit. "I'm here to help you." There was no response, just the eerie stillness of the night. I continued walking around the mill, searching for any signs of her presence. Suddenly I heard a faint sound, a soft whisper carried on the wind. "Help me." I froze, recognizing the voice from my earlier encounters. "Emily, is that you?" The whisper grew louder, more urgent. "I need to go home." I felt a surge of determination. "I understand. I'm here to help you move on." As if in response, the air around me seemed to shift. A cold breeze swept past, and I felt a tingling sensation in my bones. The flashlight flickered, casting long shadows that danced around the dilapidated structure. I took a step closer to the center of the mill, focusing on the task at hand. "Tell me what you need to move on," I said, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at me. There was a moment of silence before the whispers returned, clearer this time. "Find the letter. It holds the truth." I looked around, trying to locate the source of the voice. "Where can I find it?" "Under the old oak tree," the whisper guided me. I turned and walked toward the large oak tree that stood a short distance from the mill. Its branches reached out like skeletal fingers, and the ground beneath it was littered with fallen leaves and debris. I knelt down, shining my flashlight at the base of the tree, and spotted a partially buried envelope. Carefully, I dug it out, brushing off the dirt and debris. The envelope was old, the paper yellowed and fragile. I opened it, revealing a handwritten letter inside. The ink was faded, but the words were still legible. "To whoever finds this, my name is Emily Miller." That night I was desperate for help. I trusted a stranger on the highway, but it turned out to be my undoing. Please, if you're reading this, know that I meant no harm. Help me find peace so I can finally rest. Thank you. Tears welled up in my eyes as I read the letter, understanding the pain and fear Emily must have felt. "I'll help you, Emily," I whispered, holding the letter close. I placed the letter back in the envelope and stood up, feeling a sense of closure. "I hope you can find peace now." As I turned to leave, I felt a light breeze brush past me, carrying a sense of relief and gratitude. The oppressive weight lifted, replaced by a calm stillness. I knew my task was done. I walked back to my car, the first light of dawn starting to break on the horizon. The highway was quiet, the night giving way to the morning. As I drove away from the old mill, I felt a sense of accomplishment and peace. Emily's spirit was finally free, and the highway phantom legend would now have a happy ending. The next night I drove down Highway 70 again, just to see if anything had changed. The road was still empty, the darkness less menacing with the knowledge that Emily was at peace. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her again, but there was nothing. No hitchhiker, no shadow, just the endless stretch of road ahead. I smiled to myself, feeling a weight lifted off my shoulders. The highway was just a road now, no longer haunted by the ghost of a lost soul. I continued my drive, the night feeling less frightening, knowing that I had helped someone find their way home. As I pulled into my apartment complex, I took one last look at the dark highway behind me, now free from its phantom presence. I knew I would never forget the experience, but I was grateful for the chance to bring peace to both Emily and myself. The old farmhouse stood alone at the end of a long, winding dirt road outside of Springfield, Nebraska. I had always been fascinated by fixer-uppers, the idea of bringing something neglected back to life. When I saw the listing, it seemed like the perfect project. The price was right and the house had character. I decided to buy it, not knowing the secrets it held. I arrived on a bright Saturday morning, the sun high in the sky. The farm was surrounded by vast fields of corn and wheat, the air filled with the scent of earth and growing things. The house itself was a two-story structure, white paint peeling from the wooden siding. Windows were boarded up in places, and the front porch sagged under the weight of years of neglect. I parked my truck in the gravel driveway, the crunch of gravel under the tires the only sound. As I approached the front door, I felt a shiver run down my spine. The air felt colder here despite the warm sun. I grabbed the heavy wooden door, pulling it open with some effort. It creaked loudly, the sound echoing in the empty yard. Inside, the house was dark, the interior covered in dust and cobwebs. Sunlight streamed through the broken windows, casting long shadows across the floor. I stepped inside, setting down my toolbox near the staircase. The living room was vast, with a large fireplace dominating one wall. Furniture was scattered around, covered in white sheets. I pulled one sheet off a chair, revealing a worn-out sofa underneath. The smell of mildew hit me, making my nose wrinkle. I decided to start with cleaning, but something made me pause. There was a door at the far end of the room, slightly ajar. I walked over, curiosity getting the better of me. Pushing the door open, I found a narrow hallway leading to the back of the house. Pictures hung crookedly on the walls, faces of people I didn't recognize staring back at me. One photo caught my eye, a family standing in front of the farmhouse, smiling. Their eyes seemed hollow, almost pleading. I shook off the uneasy feeling and continued my work. Hours passed as I scrubbed floors and wiped down surfaces. The sun began to set, casting an orange hue through the windows. I decided to take a break, sitting on the dilapidated sofa. The house was silent, save for the creaking of the old wood settling. I heard a noise upstairs, the sound of footsteps on the wooden floor. My heart raced as I stood up, looking toward the staircase. The footsteps grew louder, closer. I grabbed a flashlight from my toolbox and cautiously approached the stairs. Each step I took creaked under my weight, the sound unnerving in the quiet house. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched out, doors on either side closed tightly. I called out, "Hello, is someone there?" No answer. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. The footsteps stopped. I moved down the hallway, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Reaching the end, I saw a door slightly open, light spilling out from underneath. I pushed it open, revealing a small bedroom. The bed was unmade, clothes thrown carelessly on the floor. A mirror on the wall reflected my image back at me, distorted by a crack running down its center. I stepped closer to the mirror, wiping away some of the grime. My reflection stared back, but something was wrong. Behind me in the mirror, I saw a shadowy figure standing in the doorway. I spun around, but no one was there. My breath quickened, heart pounding in my chest. I turned back to the mirror, but the figure was gone. I backed out of the room, deciding it was time to leave for the night. As I made my way back downstairs, I heard a whisper, faint but clear. "Help me." I froze, listening intently. The whisper came again, closer this time. "Help me." Panic surged through me. I grabbed my things, rushing toward the front door. As I reached for the handle, the door slammed shut. I yanked at it, trying to open it, but it wouldn't budge. The whispering continued, now all around me. "Help me." I ran to the window, pulling it open and trying to climb out, but it was stuck. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. I could feel someone watching me, their presence heavy in the room. I backed away from the window, trying to calm myself. My mind raced, thinking of how to escape. I remembered the basement door at the back of the house. Maybe there was another way out. I grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the back door, which was now swinging open on its own. I slipped outside, the cool night air a relief against the tension inside. I didn't stop to look back, sprinting down the dirt road toward my truck. Once inside, I locked the doors and leaned against the steering wheel, trying to catch my breath. The house loomed in the distance, silent once more. I started the engine, the truck roaring to life. As I pulled away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something. The house was just a dark silhouette against the night sky. The next morning, I decided to return, determined to uncover the truth behind the strange occurrences. I drove back to the farmhouse, the sun rising behind me. The fields were still, the air crisp with the promise of a new day. I parked the truck and approached the house cautiously, the morning light doing little to ease my anxiety. I entered through the front door, which was now easier to open. The living room was the same as before, but something felt different. I noticed fresh footprints in the dust leading toward the hallway. My heart raced as I followed them, the footprints leading to the back door. It was open again, inviting me in. I walked through, finding the basement door. This time it was unlocked. I descended the stairs, the flashlight illuminating the narrow steps. The basement was cool and damp, the air thick with the smell of mold. I saw tools and old furniture stored in the corners, but what caught my attention was a small chest in the center of the room. I approached the chest, the flashlight beam revealing intricate carvings on the lid. It looked old, possibly antique. I knelt down and lifted the lid, finding it filled with old letters and photographs. I sifted through them, discovering the story of the previous owner, a man named Henry Miller. The letters spoke of financial troubles and family disputes. One letter mentioned a disappearance, a reference to Henry's wife Clara, who had vanished without a trace a few years prior. The photographs showed a happy family, now tainted by the mystery of Clara's disappearance. I felt a chill, understanding that the house held secrets Henry couldn't reveal. As I read the last letter, the basement door slammed shut. I jumped back, the flashlight flickering. The whispers returned, louder and more desperate. "Help me," they echoed around the room. I stood up, clutching the letters, trying to make sense of what was happening. I heard a sound behind me and turned to see a shadowy figure standing in the corner. It was Clara, her face pale and eyes hollow. She moved toward me, her footsteps silent on the concrete floor. I took a step back, my mind racing. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice trembling. She reached out, her hand passing through mine. "Find the truth," she whispered. "Help me." I nodded, understanding that her spirit was trapped here, seeking closure. I promised to uncover the truth about her disappearance. The figure of Clara faded, the basement returning to its quiet state. The door unlocked itself and I rushed up the stairs, determined to help. Over the next few weeks, I delved into Henry Miller's past, searching for clues about Clara's disappearance. I visited the local library in Springfield, sifting through old newspapers and records. Most of the information was vague, but I found a report of a suspicious car seen near the farmhouse on the night Clara vanished. No arrests were made, and the case went cold. I decided to search the farmhouse again, hoping to find more clues. One evening, I returned to the house, flashlight in hand. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the property. I entered the basement, the atmosphere tense. I examined the chest again, looking for anything I might have missed. Behind some old tools, I found a hidden compartment. Inside was a small, dusty journal. I opened it, reading Henry's handwritten entries. He wrote about his growing fear of someone watching him, someone he couldn't trust. The last entry was frantic, mentioning Clara's disappearance and his inability to protect her. I felt a surge of determination. I needed to find out who was responsible for Clara's disappearance. I continued my research, reaching out to old residents of Springfield who might remember Henry and Clara. One elderly woman, Mrs. Thompson, agreed to talk. She recalled seeing Henry arguing with a neighbor, a man named Tom Harris, the night Clara disappeared. I arranged to meet Tom, who now lived in a nearby town. When I arrived, he was older, his face lined with age and regret. I approached him cautiously, showing him the journal and explaining my purpose. His eyes widened with recognition and sorrow. Henry was a good man, Tom said, his voice heavy. But Clara, she had secrets too. They were planning to leave town, start fresh somewhere else. That night, things got out of hand. I didn't mean for it to happen, but Clara, she just disappeared. I pressed for more details, but Tom shook his head. I can't remember anything else. It's all a blur. Despite the lack of concrete information, I felt closer to the truth. I returned to the farmhouse, feeling Clara's presence urging me on. I decided to hold a small ceremony, hoping to help her spirit find peace. I set up candles around the basement, placing the letters and journal in the center. I spoke softly, recounting Clara's story and my desire to help her move on. As I spoke, the air grew colder, the whispers filling the room once more. Clara appeared again, her form more defined this time. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice carrying a sense of relief. The basement door opened by itself and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. I felt a sense of accomplishment, knowing that I had helped Clara find peace. I left the house that night, the farmhouse no longer feeling haunted but peaceful. In the weeks that followed, the strange occurrences in the house ceased. The whispers were gone, and the presence of Clara was a comforting memory rather than a source of fear. I continued renovating the farmhouse, bringing it back to life as Henry and Clara had once dreamed. One evening, as I was finishing up in the living room, I noticed a photograph on the mantel. It was the family photo I had seen before, now restored and placed with care. I felt a warmth, knowing that Clara's spirit was finally at rest. The farmhouse, once abandoned and full of secrets, was now a home filled with hope and new beginnings. Looking back, I realized that the house had chosen me for a reason. Helping Clara had not only resolved the mystery of her disappearance, but also gave me a purpose. The farmhouse stood as a testament to the past, now intertwined with the present. I knew I would always feel connected to the family that once lived here, their stories now part of the home's history. The project took months, but I never felt alone in the house. Sometimes I would hear faint sounds like footsteps or soft whispers, but they were no longer frightening. They felt like echoes of the past, reminders of the journey I had undertaken. I learned to respect the history of the place, understanding that some secrets are better left uncovered while others need to be brought to light. In the end, the old farmhouse became a place of healing, both for Clara and for me. It stood as a symbol of perseverance and the importance of facing the unknown. The secrets of the abandoned farm were finally laid to rest, allowing new stories to begin. As I stood on the porch one evening, watching the sun set over the fields, I felt a sense of peace. The farmhouse, once a place of mystery and fear, was now a home filled with life and memories. I knew that I had made the right decision, embracing the challenge and uncovering the truth. The secrets of the abandoned farm were no longer haunting me, but guiding me toward a brighter future. We were 5 friends from Portland, Oregon, excited about our cross-country road trip. It was supposed to be a month-long adventure filled with music, laughter, and freedom. Our van was packed with everything we needed: snacks, clothes, camping gear, and our favorite playlists. We set off on a sunny Friday morning, the city skyline fading behind us as we hit the open highway. The first few days were perfect. We drove through the Rockies, stopping at scenic overlooks and small towns. Everyone was in high spirits, taking turns driving and sharing stories late into the night. On the 4th day, we decided to take a shortcut through a less-traveled road in rural Wyoming. The GPS directed us onto a narrow, gravel-covered highway surrounded by dense forests. At first, the drive was smooth. The trees loomed tall on either side, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. We passed old barns and empty fields, the only sounds the hum of the engine and our conversation. Around midday, we noticed the road starting to curve more sharply. The GPS signal began to falter, and we realized we were in a remote area with little to no cell service. "Looks like we're pretty out here," Jake said, squinting at the map on his phone. Not much on the way back. Yeah? I replied, tapping the steering wheel. Let's keep going. There should be a gas station up ahead. After about 20 minutes, our van hit a pothole, causing us to bounce slightly. As we passed a bend, we saw a small town sign, "Welcome to Ravenwood." It was the first sign of civilization we'd seen in hours. Relief washed over us, and we decided to stop for lunch and refuel. We rolled into Ravenwood around noon, the sun shining brightly. The town was small with a few storefronts lining the main street. There was a diner, a gas station, and a couple of antique shops. We parked the van near the diner, its neon sign flickering above the entrance. "Let's grab some food," Sarah suggested, stretching her legs. "I'm starving." We entered the diner, the bell above the door jingling as we walked in. The place was clean but quiet, with only a few patrons scattered around. The waitress looked up from her counter, offering a polite smile. "What can I get for you folks?" she asked. "We'll have 4 burgers, a couple of salads, and some fries," Jake ordered. "And 4 sodas." "Coming right up," she replied, writing down our order. We found a booth near the window, the sunlight streaming in and casting patterns on the checkered floor. As we waited for our food, we chatted about the next leg of our trip. The conversation was light, filled with jokes and plans for the upcoming days. When our food arrived, we dug in, savoring the break from driving. The diner smelled like fresh coffee and grilled meat, making us feel right at home. After lunch, Jake went to pay the bill while the rest of us stretched and grabbed our things. As Jake returned, the waitress handed him the check. "Here you go. You folks look like you're new in town. First time?" "Yeah," Jake said, glancing around. "Just passing through on a road trip." She nodded, her smile unwavering. "Welcome to Ravenwood. If you need anything, let us know." We thanked her and left the diner, heading back to the van. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the main street. We refueled and decided to spend the night in town, not wanting to drive any further in the dark. "There's a motel down the street," Jake said, pointing to a modest building with a vacancy sign in the window. "It's not much, but it's clean." We agreed and walked to the motel, the streets now quiet and empty. The building was older, with faded paint and a slightly worn appearance. The lobby was small, with a front desk and a few chairs. The receptionist greeted us warmly. "Welcome to Ravenwood Motel. How can I help you?" "We'd like a room for the night," Jake replied. 4 beds, please." "Of course," she said, typing on her computer. "You're all set. Here's your key. Room 12. Enjoy your stay." We thanked her and headed to our room. It was clean, with basic furnishings and a window overlooking the parking lot. We unpacked our bags and settled in, the atmosphere relaxed after a long day. As night deepened, the town grew eerily quiet. We decided to watch a movie in the living area of the motel, the flickering screen casting soft light on our faces. Around midnight, Sarah suggested we go for a walk to stretch our legs. "Sure, why not?" I agreed. "It's probably just us here." We left the room and stepped into the cool night air. The main street was empty, the only sounds the distant hoot of an owl and the rustling of leaves. Streetlights illuminated the sidewalks, casting pools of light on the pavement. As we walked, we noticed something odd. The houses we passed were all identical, with the same old-fashioned decorations and well-manicured lawns. There were no signs of life, no lights on in the windows, no movement. "That's strange," Jake remarked, glancing around. "I thought this was a small town." "Maybe everyone else is asleep," Sarah suggested. "Or maybe they're not home." We continued down the street, the silence growing thicker. Suddenly we heard footsteps approaching from the opposite direction. I turned to see a man walking toward us, his steps steady and deliberate. "Hey there," he called out, his voice friendly. "You folks new in town?" "Yeah," Jake replied. "Just staying at the motel." "Welcome to Ravenwood," the man said, smiling. "Beautiful place, isn't it?" "Yeah, it's nice," I answered, feeling a bit uneasy by his overly cheerful demeanor. He nodded, then turned to walk away. "If you need anything, feel free to stop by the diner." They have the best pies. We watched him disappear into one of the houses, the silence resuming its hold on the street. That was weird, Sarah said, glancing at us. He seemed too eager to help. Maybe, I said, trying to brush it off. But it's late. Let's head back. As we turned to walk back, another figure appeared at the end of the street, a woman this time walking in our direction. Her steps were slow, almost hesitant. "Hi there," she greeted us, her voice soft. "Lovely night, isn't it?" "Yeah," Jake replied, exchanging a glance with the others. "It's pretty." The woman nodded, her eyes meeting ours. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask." "Thanks," Sarah said, smiling politely. "Good night." We continued walking, the tension building with each step. The woman's presence felt unsettling, like she was watching us too closely. When we reached the motel, we hurried inside, the safety of the lobby welcoming us back. "That was creepy," Jake muttered as we locked the door behind us. "Yeah," I agreed. "Maybe Ravenwood isn't as friendly as it seems." We returned to our room, the unease lingering in the air. The living area felt colder, the shadows deeper. We decided to turn in, hoping the morning would bring more activity to the town. Around 2 a.m., I was jolted awake by the sound of loud banging coming from outside our room. I sat up, my heart racing, listening intently. The banging continued, a rhythmic thud against the window. "What's that?" I whispered to the group who were huddled together on the bed. "I don't know," Jake replied, his voice shaky. "Maybe someone is trying to get our attention. Or maybe it's just the wind," Sarah suggested, though her voice lacked conviction. I got up cautiously and approached the window, pulling back the curtain slightly to peer outside. The street was empty, but the banging noise persisted. I pressed my ear against the glass, trying to identify the source. "It's coming from the diner," I realized. "Let's check it out." We grabbed our flashlights and left the room, the corridor dimly lit by the overhead bulbs. As we walked down the hallway, the banging grew louder, more urgent. Reaching the front door, I opened it cautiously, stepping into the lobby. The lobby was dark, the only light coming from the street lamps outside. The receptionist was nowhere to be seen. The banging noise was coming from the front of the diner, just down the street. "Should we go see what's happening?" Jake asked, hesitating. "Yeah," I said, grabbing my jacket. "Let's go." We exited the motel and headed toward the diner, the night air thick with tension. The main street was still empty, the only sound our footsteps on the pavement. As we approached the diner, we saw the front door swinging back and forth, the light inside flickering. "Someone's inside," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. We entered the diner cautiously, the bell above the door jingling as we stepped in. The place was empty, tables set as if waiting for customers. The sound of loud banging echoed from the kitchen area. "Hello?" I called out, stepping toward the back. "Is someone there?" No response. The banging continued, louder and more frantic. I moved closer, the others following behind me. The kitchen was at the far end, the door swinging violently. "Maybe someone's trapped in there," Jake suggested. I pushed the door open, the hinges creaking loudly. The kitchen was a mess, pots and pans scattered across the floor. In the center of the room stood the waitress from earlier, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. She was banging on the counter, trying to get our attention. "Help me," she cried out, her voice breaking. "They're coming." "What do you mean?" I asked, approaching her slowly. "People, the townspeople, they're not normal," she replied, her eyes darting around the room. "What's going on?" Sarah asked, stepping forward. Before she could answer, the door swung shut, and the room went dark. The lights flickered and died, plunging us into darkness. We heard footsteps approaching, the sound heavy and deliberate. "Who are you?" Jake demanded, shining his flashlight around the room. The light cut back on, revealing a group of townspeople standing at the entrance. Their faces were blank, their eyes void of emotion. They stood motionless, staring at us with an unsettling intensity. "Leave now," the waitress said, her voice trembling. "You don't belong here." "We mean no harm," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "We just need some help." But the townspeople didn't respond. They began to move toward us, their steps synchronized and purposeful. Panic set in as we realized something was terribly wrong. "Let's get out of here," Jake whispered, grabbing our arms. We turned to leave, but the entrance door was blocked by the townspeople. The waitress stepped forward, her face contorted with fear. "You can't leave. You belong here now." "Why?" I demanded. "What's happening?" Before anyone could answer, the room started to spin. The walls seemed to close in, the air thick with tension. We stumbled back, trying to find another way out, but the townspeople advanced, their presence overwhelming. "Stay back!" I shouted, backing into a corner. My heart pounded in my chest, my breaths shallow and rapid. The others were equally frantic, searching for an escape route, but every door seemed to lead us deeper into the diner. Suddenly, the lights cut out again, and the room plunged into darkness once more. We heard whispers all around us, voices overlapping in a cacophony of fear and desperation. "Help me. Help me." I felt a cold hand grip my shoulder, spinning me around to face one of the townspeople. Their eyes bore into mine, empty and hollow. "You're not welcome here," they whispered, their voice echoing unnaturally. I shook off their touch, backing away as the whispers grew louder. "We have to leave," I urged, grabbing Jake's arm. The others nodded, fear etched on their faces. We turned to run, but the path was blocked again by the townspeople, their numbers growing. The room felt suffocating, the pressure building with each passing second. "Don't let them catch you," Sarah screamed, pulling us toward the back door. We sprinted through the kitchen, the sounds of pursuit close behind us. The main hall was a maze of tables and chairs, but we navigated it as quickly as possible, the fear driving us forward. Finally, we burst through a side door, finding ourselves in a narrow alley behind the diner. We ran down the alley, the footsteps of the townspeople echoing behind us. The street was deserted, the only light coming from the flickering street lamps. We didn't stop until we reached our motel, gasping for breath and drenched in sweat. "That was insane," Jake panted, leaning against the wall. "What the hell was that?" "I don't know," I replied, trying to calm my racing heart. "But we need to leave now." We grabbed our things and piled into the van, not wanting to look back. As we drove away, the town of Ravenwood faded into the distance, the eerie quiet returning. The engine hummed, the silence inside the van almost as oppressive as before. "What just happened?" Sarah asked, her voice shaky. "It felt like the town was alive," Jake said, eyes fixed on the road ahead, like they wanted us to stay. "I think we stumbled into something we shouldn't have," I replied, trying to make sense of it all. "We need to get as far away as possible." We drove through the night, the highway stretching endlessly before us. The first light of dawn was beginning to break on the horizon, casting a pale glow on the road. Exhaustion weighed us down, but the memory of Ravenwood kept us alert. As we neared the next town, the tension began to ease. We passed through small communities, the familiar signs of civilization, a welcome sight. By noon, we were back on a main highway, the vast expanse of open road a stark contrast to the claustrophobic streets of Ravenwood. "Let's not stop anywhere like that again," Jake said, breaking the silence. Agreed upon, we kept driving, the miles ticking by. The sun was high, the sky clear, but the fear lingered in our minds. We couldn't shake the feeling that Ravenwood was watching us, its grip still holding us back. By evening, we reached a large rest area, the flashing signs of convenience stores and fast food restaurants a beacon of normalcy. We decided to take a break, stretching our legs and grabbing some food. The atmosphere felt safer here, the presence of other travelers a comforting reminder of life outside Ravenwood. As we sat eating, we discussed what had happened. The waitress, the townspeople, the whispers. It all seemed too surreal to be real. But the fear was undeniable, etched into our memories. "We need to stick together," Sarah said firmly. "Whatever that was, we can't let it tear us apart." We nodded in agreement, the bond of friendship holding us strong. The rest area was busy, people laughing and chatting, the normalcy a stark contrast to our recent experience. We tried to relax, the adrenaline of the night beginning to fade. After our break, we resumed our journey, the road ahead open and inviting. The sunset, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, the promise of another day on the road fueling our determination. We pushed forward, the nightmare of Ravenwood becoming a distant memory, but as the days passed, we couldn't fully escape the feeling that something was following us. Every shadow seemed to move, every noise amplified in the quiet of the night. We dismissed it as residual fear, the mind playing tricks after such a terrifying experience. One night, about a week into our trip, we decided to camp near a quiet lake in Montana. The setting was peaceful, the water calm under the moonlight. We set up our tents, the sounds of nature a soothing backdrop. We sat around a campfire, the warmth of the flames comforting us as we shared stories and laughed. As the night deepened, the forest around us grew still. The fire crackled, the only sound breaking the silence. Suddenly we heard a familiar sound, the bell of the diner in Ravenwood. It was faint, carried on the wind, but unmistakable. "Did you guys hear that?" Jake asked, his eyes wide with alarm. "Yeah," I replied, my heart racing. It sounded like Ravenwood. "We must be dreaming," Sarah said, though her voice lacked conviction. I stood up, the firelight casting long shadows on my face. "We need to check it out," I said, unable to shake the feeling that we weren't done with Ravenwood yet. "Are you crazy?" Jake snapped. "We just left that nightmare behind." But I was already walking toward the sound, the others following reluctantly. The forest was dense, the trees towering overhead, their branches intertwining to form a canopy that blocked out most of the moonlight. The bell grew louder, the sound pulling us deeper into the woods. We reached a clearing, the lake shimmering in the distance. The diner bell was still ringing, but there was no diner in sight. Confused, we looked around, trying to find the source of the sound. Suddenly, the ground beneath us trembled, and the air grew thick with an unnatural chill. "What's happening?" Sarah cried, backing away. Before we could react, a building materialized in front of us, a replica of the Ravenwood Diner, complete with the same flickering sign and old-fashioned decor. The bell rang again, louder this time, and the door swung open, revealing the waitress standing inside, her face pale and eyes empty. "Welcome back," she said, her voice echoing unnaturally. "You never left." "We need to go," Jake demanded, grabbing our arms. "This isn't real." But we were frozen, unable to move as the waitress stepped forward. Behind her, the townspeople from Ravenwood appeared, their faces blank and their eyes void of emotion. They surrounded us, their presence suffocating. "Stay with us," the waitress pleaded. "You belong here now." Panic surged through me as I tried to break free, but the grip was too strong. The air felt heavy, making it hard to breathe. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent. "Stay with us. Stay with us." We struggled, the fear consuming us as the townspeople advanced. The diner building loomed over us, the reality of our situation sinking in. We were trapped, caught in the nightmare of Ravenwood, unable to escape its grasp. "Help me!" I shouted, my voice cracking with desperation. But the only response was the relentless advance of the townspeople, their movements synchronized and unyielding. The diner doors slammed shut, and the room went dark, the only light coming from the flickering sign above. We were surrounded, the nightmare becoming our reality. The town of Ravenwood had claimed us, just as it had claimed so many before. The whispers echoed in our minds, the terror of being trapped forever settling in. As the last of our resistance faded, the darkness enveloped us, the dream of our road trip turning into an eternal nightmare. Ravenwood was no longer a town on the map, but a place of no return, where those who dared to visit were doomed to stay forever.